In a universe where necromancers are the top dogs, a poor orphan child who was born in a junkyard has to fight every day just to survive. No matter how he tried, he could never make a deal with even a single corpse, earning the ridicule of all the people around him. But one day, his gaze landed on a corpse that the shop owner was preparing to throw away, one which no necromancer had ever been able to bind. Assuming this was to be his last, he was amazed when he actually succeeded. What secret is inside this odd and silent corpse? The story begins with a fight, a necromancer on stage in a brutal arena. He releases his creation, a fearful corpse by the name of Hector, fire glowing inside its eyes. The challenger does no more than point, bringing out a monstrous creature with long, curved claws to attack. The creature strikes out, its tongue whipping from its mouth like a death's whip. These are no ordinary spell users. They are necromancers, controllers of the dead who make corpses fight each other in brutal battles. Their creations are their champions, and such violent battles have become the great spectacle of the era. Among the cheering crowd is a boy named Yuzu. His eyes shine with awe as he observes. This is not just a spectacle to him, it's a dream, a vision of what he wants to be. 17 years have passed, and Yuzu, now an adult, resides in a rundown hut. The roof is broken, rats run along the floor, and there is a dead body on a table, its chest glowing weakly. Yuzu whispers an incantation, feeding energy slowly into the corpse. A crystal starts to grow inside his chest, pulsating with tremendous energy. The body begins to stir, but at once a faint crack appears across the crystal. The light goes out, the energy drains away, and the body falls back into darkness again. Another failure. Disgusted, Yuzu curls up on the ground, cursing under his breath. He's back to square one. Over the next few days, he does whatever odd work he can find. Fixing, cleaning, whatever pays a coin. After one grueling shift, he walks home while reading a page of scribbled notes. Distracted, he doesn't catch a voice calling out his name. Before he can turn around, a monster's fist crashes into his face, and he goes tumbling. His master, another necromancer, walks over and taunts him, sneering that he'd told him to get out of the city. He refers to Yuzu as trash, the same trash he emerged from, and even insults his deceased father as another piece of trash. The abuse doesn't end there. The man taunts that Yuzu doesn't even own a knight, but Yuzu does not cower. Bleeding and spent, he gets up again, his notebook clutched tightly in his hand. He says that he is not garbage. Only he can determine what he will be. The necromancer tells his monster to hold Yuzu in place and gives a final warning. Leave the city, or next time he'll be totally annihilated. No one, no matter how they are, created, can decide but themselves who they will become. Those were the first words uttered by the necromancer Raffle, a slum-born orphaned boy like Yuzu. He entered the War of Corpses single-handedly, won 6 straight battles, and was the world's most famous human. Yuzu aspired to be just like him. At least once during his life, he wished to be the best, loved by everyone, his name shouted throughout the globe. But afterwards, in secret at home, a hard voice gave him insults, soaked in disdain, calling him again and again a worthless thing. In the aisles of weird substances of a necromancer's store, Yuzu roamed. There, he saw a dead woman on the side. Wondering, he asked the shopkeeper about the human-shaped substance. The shopkeeper told him that it was strange. It had been discounted for a year and had already been purchased 13 times. All the purchasers had not activated it, but returned it. Yuzu inquired why, unlike other failed substances, it had not solidified and broken. The shopkeeper answered that every now and then, such defective bodies surface, indestructible but dead. Since it was to be disposed of in any case, he would sell it at a low price, provided that it could not be returned. Inspecting the knuckles of the corpse, Yuzu inquired about her hands. The shopkeeper informed him that she had once been a legendary mercenary, rumored to decimate anything with one punch. But he continued that a knight is merely an instrument. It does not think or feel, so whatever she was while alive did not matter anymore. Yuzu blanched, then refused, calling a product that had previously failed 13 times a risk too big. The shopkeeper just shrugged and told him, "Trash is always trash." The comment set Yuzu's anger ablaze. Convinced, he purchased the corpse with all his remaining money. He could not afford tomorrow's food, much less next week's rent. He knew it was almost futile, yet something within him forced onward. Regardless of what anyone told him, he felt that he could pull it off. That someday he'd be the greatest, cheered by the world. He started the ritual, chanting with determination. Power exploded through the room. The corpse creation worked. Then the corpse opened one of her eyes and spoke, inquiring who he was. Yuzu froze in shock, screaming as he grabbed a butcher's knife, not knowing how a dead body could speak. At that moment, the corpse saw the knife in his hand. Power flashed around her fist, and then she attacked, her lethal blow hurtling directly at him. The shadow came back again, tormenting Yuzu's mind. It taunted him, addressing him as useless, informing him that his life and his mother were worthless. No amount of effort on his part, it told him, would ever get him noticed by others. Yuzu woke up with a shriek. His ragged breath came in sharp gasps, but he regained his composure soon, persuading his brain that all of it had been a dream. Corpses couldn't talk after all. Then, out of the darkness, a voice spoke. The corpse of the dead woman, now sitting upright on the floor before him, informed him that he was a lucky man. If her right leg had functioned, her punch would have hit him. Yuzu's eyes bulged in shock as he understood he was strapped to a chair. The woman's corpse stared at him, telling him what he'd done to her body, threatening not to let him try her patience again. Next time, she didn't say, she wouldn't miss. That was when Yuzu noticed the severity of damage inflicted by her previous blow. She gradually came to understand the situation. She had passed away and was brought back to life. She expressed appreciation to Yuzu for reviving her, but instructed him never to show his face in front of her again. She attempted to depart when Yuzu halted her. He told her that her left arm and right leg weren't working. They were not originally hers. After that, he showed her that he could move them himself. Because he was a necromancer, he needed to control those limbs for her. She didn't hesitate to take a butcher's knife and amputate her leg. Standing on one foot, she declared her name, Ilonora, the world's strongest and most beautiful warrior. She started to walk away again, but Yuzu called out to her. Being a mercenary in life and selling her own body after death, it was obvious that she desperately needed money. So he asked her to work for him, to fight for him. Ilonora answered that as long as the salary was high, she didn't care about the risk. She couldn't turn down the proposal anyway, since she owed a debt larger than he could possibly comprehend. Serenely, Yuzu inquired, "Would 80 billion gold suffice to repay your debt?" She confessed it would, and then inquired as to how he intended to obtain so much money. Yuzu introduced her to a poster for Corpse War this year. The prize, 100 billion gold. He asked if she wanted to participate. Because technically she was a corpse knight, entry would not be a problem, if they kept quiet about the fact that she was really alive. Ilonora consented, but immediately began bargaining on her share. She insisted on 95% of the winnings. Yuzu attempted to appeal to her on a logical basis, citing the material costs and maintenance, and suggested 85%. She was adamant. He upped it to 90% in the hopes that she would give way, but she was immovable. In the end, he acquiesced. As soon as he consented, Ilonora insisted that it be made in writing. She didn't believe anything said. Days went by and the two drilled moving in tandem, but it wasn't working out. Ilonora complained of his too quick pace and growled about the awkward mask she wore. Yuzu reminded her of the regulation. When using human-shaped materials, they had to be worn so as to cover 80% of the face to avoid recognition. He insisted again that no one should ever discover she was alive. As if on cue, a voice yelled out Yuzu's name. It was the woman who had already beaten him up. She reminded him of her previous threat to get out of the city. Her eyes landed on the knight standing next to him, and she glared at Ilonora, disparaging her looks and referring to both of them as trash, ugly, and sad. She laughed and told him it would be fun to see him get annihilated in the tournament. She turned her back and told him she'd let him off this once. But Ilonora quickly retorted, "Says the one who resembles a skin tag." Yuzu overheard her and went into panic mode, trying to shush her, but damage was done. Rather than diffusing the tension, he instead escalated it by firing another insult. Incensed, the female necromancer called for her corpse knight to strike. With no hesitation whatsoever, Ilonora went into battle mode and attacked. The two corpse knights clashed immediately, both bent on the first strike. Kilina was a necromancer of decent skill, nothing special, but better than most. She achieved mediocre results with mediocre effort. That was her routine. And she leveraged those small achievements as a way to be superior to others, particularly those who worked harder, but still were beneath her. It made her feel superior, her life's best pleasure. In a sense, a person like Yuzu, who worked her tail off and was still worth less than garbage on the ground, was the perfect target, perfect plaything. And now, Kilina was paralyzed, her gaze transfixed on the sight before her, her own corpse knight totally wrecked by Ilionora's onslaught. Both Kilina and her friend were flabbergasted and could not believe what they were seeing. Yuzu, coolly confident and with a mocking tone, inquired if she had a problem, but Kilina, gazing at Ilonora in terror, was also speechless. Subsequently, in an alleyway, Yuzu reprimanded Ilonora for brawling outside the competition, reminding her it was against the rules. Ilonora was not apologetic. She informed him that he shouldn't give her orders. Regaining his composure, Yuzu explained that it wasn't an order, merely a request. He reminded her that he was the War of Corpses specialist, and that she should not forget the debt she owed him. They couldn't take unnecessary risks. At the registration desk, Yuzu practiced his corpse knight's movements. Ilonora tripped clumsily, her movements stiff and crude. Nevertheless, the examiners took their entry. Although it was clear she passed barely the fundamentals, they required sufficient participants to complete the lower ranks. Yuzu then put on his necromancer gear with great pride. He had waited 17 years for this moment. Putting on his robe and catching up on an aside with Ilonora, there came a booming announcement in the compound, calling all players to the arena. In an instant, the huge arena was packed. Necromancers, spooky corpses, knights. Much more than anyone anticipated. Then a strong voice boomed throughout the Colosseum. It told of names, how they survived bodies. Meat rotted, bones crumbled to dust, but a name could survive. Some names would survive for years, some for centuries or even millennia. On this cruel and magnificent killing ground, the War of Corpses, the speaker announced his desire for a name that would again arise, a name never to be forgotten. The voice spoke to all 8,304 necromancers, filling them with wonder and fear. Were they prepared to embark on this war, to sacrifice their souls, to inscribe their stories into eternity? The arena let out a shout of determination. Then the announcement. The 145th War of Corpses had officially commenced. The crowd cheered. The air itself shuddered. The earth shook beneath the force of expectation. The purpose of the opening round was to spotlight new competitors, giving them a chance to be noticed. The format was simple, yet merciless. Each necromancer would be paired randomly. To advance, one needed 2 victories. 4 losses meant immediate elimination. Initial matches were determined by placement. Whoever stood on the dividing black lines would face the person behind them. Yuzu was on one such line. Gradually, he turned around to know who was following him. There was a big man in front of him, along with a really huge corpse knight. The man gazed at Yuzu and uttered a few words. He questioned whether Yuzu would say that he was ugly and disgusting. Then, with determination, he stated that he would reveal to Yuzu the most beautiful thing of all, something he had himself made, and he promised that Yuzu would comprehend it. Yuzu answered the man at his back that he had been looking at his corpse knight. He said it looked good and started praising the design and build, admiring its craftsmanship. Then, with a smile, he asserted that even if it was a great knight, he still meant to win. He bid the man a good fight and offered a handshake. The guy agreed and said that it was the first time that someone had ever offered to shake his hand. He was amazed that Yuzu did not care at all how he looked. The initial phases of the War of Corpses started. There were 3 rounds of competition, and the winners of just 1,000 would advance to the main competition. The rules of each of the initial phases differed with each iteration, so it was difficult for the participants to prepare beforehand. Prior to battle, Yuzu gave a communication device to Ilonora that he had slightly tampered with. It was worn on her ear and enabled them to communicate over a 300-meter range. Resonance magic was used in the device, so that sound was continuously transmitted at the same level, and only the wearer could hear it. Ilonora tested it by covering her mouth and whispering, and Yuzu confirmed that he could hear her clearly. She asked whether communication checks might detect something like that, but Yuzu explained that the competition encouraged individuality among necromancers, so such accessories were allowed. Moreover, the arena was sealed by a powerful magic circle that blocked outside communication, meaning their gadget was permitted. It only functioned within the arena itself. The game started. Yuzu approached the platform as Ilonora came into the arena. As it was just the initial round for unfamiliar opponents, the stands were vacant. No cheers, no applause, silence. The overseer issued few commands, then lifted a hand to give the battle its start. Ilonora came forward to strike, but tripped and collapsed. There was a clear mismatch in that they weren't in sync. The one was too quick, the other slow. They didn't coordinate well. Ilonora promptly suggested playing as she wanted and asked Yuzu to simply go along. Without any second thoughts, she made a direct charge at the opposing knight. The opponent's knight had a frog-like appearance, but it was able to bound away. Yuzu told her that winning relied on destroying the center of the enemy knight, which appeared as a red bead, and protecting their own. Their tactic was based on strong up-close attacks, but didn't help with defending. He proposed examining the pattern of their opponent's attack first. Ilonora opposed it, explaining that delaying would just make their opponent have time to adjust, an advantage because they were not able to move properly yet. She charged again, closing in on the Frog Knight. But again, the Frog Knight dodged with ease. Yuzu saw Ilonora wasn't even attempting to sync up with him. She fought wildly with one working arm and leg, making her movements slow and predictable. Then he saw something strange. The Frog Knight wasn't attacking, just retreating. His gaze moved to its back, where strange round things were stuck. Another necromancer spoke, inquiring if that was the best they could do. He said that great players tend to camouflage themselves among the unknowns, so he had been observing for a while. But now, discovering Yuzu not worth more effort, he declared his decision to forfeit. One of the spheres on the back of the frog stretched out, showing a human face. The necromancer claimed that he had created perfection. Ilonora inquired as to whether faces weren't meant to be 80% covered. He informed her that it wasn't an actual human face. It was one he had created after all these years of observation and meticulous measurement. It was the most perfect, the most ideal form, his own personal concept of beauty, he thought. And since it didn't exist on a real person, no regulation necessitated that it be hidden. He challenged them to see its beauty, just before it detonated. The face of the Frog Knight started to pucker, unmistakable evidence of an impending strike. Yuzu immediately knew it was an explosive and yelled at Ilonora to move back, but too late. The face of the creature hurtled out, and the blast exploded before her. Yuzu was discovered to have taken over Eleonora's arm and caused it to detonate exactly when the enemy's blow reached her, resulting in her losing an arm. Ilonora asked if the face could be taken over by the enemy necromancer similarly. Yuzu clarified that any removed limb from a knight couldn't be taken over and would only last for a few seconds, so the bomb's flight path would always be straight. He continued to say the explosion appeared to be from enzymes of deadly amphibians, the type which only ignited under high, sudden pressure. Ilonora knew that all they had to do was dodge. The Frog Knight took another shot, which she dodged in a hurry. She moved rapidly and confessed she was enjoying the battle. A shot exploded beside her feet, pushing her back. The frog continued to fire blasts and then sprang high in the air, sending out 3 more face bombs. Ilonora evaded them, although she could no longer move around freely. As another bomb approached her, set to attack, Yuzu controlled her leg to push her out of the way, rescuing her once more. Yuzu then told her they were at their limit. If she couldn't run properly, they had no chance of victory. He had been observing their poor coordination, realizing the biggest problem was trust. Her right leg, not being originally hers, existed physically, but not mentally. It was normal for her to not rely on it, which disturbed her entire equilibrium each time she attempted running. She was asked by him to trust him and forget about that leg. But Ilonora responded that she did not trust comrades who would not share her risks. She was not fighting, so he was. He was only wagging his fingers from far away safely while she risked her life. There were more explosions that shoved her back once more. And then Yuzu explained to her that this was his final opportunity. Born in a trash dump hated by everyone, he was called the son of trash. He was constantly teased throughout his life, particularly due to his alleged father. He had lived his life being forgotten. No one would ever get to know what it felt like to live with the knowledge that every aspect of you was useless garbage. Then the man from his worst nightmares showed up again. He told him he couldn't proceed without proving to that man and to the world that they were mistaken, that he could be great. If he did not succeed, he had no life left. Encountering Ilonora, he went on, was his last hope. He would not ask her to have faith in him, but pleaded with her to believe in his desperation. Another attack flew towards Ilonora next. She turned and started running, at last letting go of control to her right leg and running naturally. Yuzu felt the difference at once. She was no longer restraining herself. She was believing in him. She instructed him to get no ideas. She didn't care about his history. He'd already rescued her twice, and now she was only hoping that he would do it once more. Then she continued to run, bearing the entirety of her weight on her right leg. It wasn't optimal, but it didn't have to be. Even if her stride wavered, it was sufficient to get away. With fewer than half the frog's bombs left, they were at an advantage. Without them, it was merely a giant toad. The frog knight pressed on its attack, but now Ilonora dodged with ease. She was quicker and more accurate. Even when a bomb almost hit her, she dodged it easily. The necromancer panicked as Ilonora dodged all attacks. Yuzu started counting the bombs. One after another, Ilonora evaded them all. Then he informed her that the bombs were expended and the frog was depleted. Preparing to pounce, Ilonora coiled strength in her fist and advanced towards the toad, but at that very moment the toad jumped over her. Abruptly, the necromancer disclosed his surprise. The body of the frog contained 10 reserve bombs reserved for this very purpose. Next, all 10 bombs that were fired from the frog simultaneously landed around her. Yuzu told Ilonora not to throw her attack upwards, but rather hit the ground. Not blinking an eye, she followed his orders and released her ultimate attack on the arena floor. Her fist, coupled with the frog face bombs, triggered an enormous explosion that destroyed the entire battlefield. The other opposing necromancer was speechless, utterly shocked at the sheer devastation his adversary had wrought. As the dust cleared and the field was in shambles, Ilonora said that Yuzu's judgment worked. He stated that, with the strength behind her punch, he had reckoned that the shockwave and the rubble from destroying the ground would be sufficient to activate the bombs without touching them. There was a flashback of them having a conversation. Ilonora had explained to him that the technique was only usable once in a game. It emptied everything in her fist, blackening her arm and taking 4 hours to recover. Yuzu wanted to know what would be the result of using the move again before her body recovered. She admitted that she had done so once before, and it resulted in her death. Her corpse lost an arm, a leg, and experienced a huge hole close to her heart. That was the cost. When she pushed it again, her heart would burst, and she'd actually die. In the present, Yuzu reminded her that while their most powerful attack was exhausted, so too was the enemy's. Ilonora smiled. Then, it was time for vicious close combat. She desired him. She attacked. There was a violent collision, and she ended the battle by stabbing the Toad Knight directly through the heart, petrifying him in an instant. The game was over. Player Yuzu was the champion. Ilonora and Yuzu stood together after the fight. Yuzu congratulated her on having fought beautifully and won the last round with ease, describing her as the best warrior. Then he saw the other necromancer standing over his dead knight. Walking up, Yuzu complimented him, saying he was proud of what he had made, proving real effort and love. He said, though, that his own knight was slightly more perfect. The necromancer was surprised. He told no one had ever complimented his work on its beauty or acknowledged his effort previously. Yuzu nodded, indicating one thing: the faces utilized as bombs. They had been created to compare against others' standards of beauty. Actual beauty, Yuzu explained, was objective and subjective. Rather than striving after others' validation, would it not be preferable to let out the beauty he envisioned? The necromancer was surprised, acknowledging he had never considered it. He grinned, referring to it as a wonderful idea, and informed Yuzu that he'd be his very first fan, seeing him become the best, and one day design an even more flawless, beautiful knight to amaze the world. At home, Yuzu informally started referring to Ilonora as Ellie. He told her it was convenient. She protested immediately. He wasn't her friend and no one had ever called her that. But after some back and forth, they reached a compromise. He could call her Ellie in battle. "I'll call her Ellie from now on anyway, just to make things simpler." Ellie asked about their next match. Yuzu told her that necromancers must rebuild their knights within a week. The issue was that the opponents were chosen randomly. Then he demonstrated the skull he wore all the time, telling her that it was his ID card, identifying him as a necromancer. All the necromancers were forced to wear one, and the shape and color of the skull indicated their ranking in the tournament. The system started with rank 7, black, for beginners or losers in the second qualifying round. Next came rank 6, bronze, rank 5, silver, rank 4, gold, rank 3, diamond, rank 2, emerald, and rank 1, ruby, showing growing achievement. The top of all was rank 0, onyx, which was given to the champion. Each rank possessed its own skull emblem. Don't worry, I will remind you of the ranks when necessary. The higher your previous rank, the stronger your opponent. Because matches were random, a rank 6 bronze might be against a rank 3 diamond, or even a rank 2 emerald, if unlucky. Yuzu opened the envelope and stopped. The name within shocked him. As he did, the scene moved to an opulent room. There was a man in darkness, while his assistant read the name of his next opponent, Yuzu. The man did not recognize it. There was no data. It appeared that this was Yuzu's first competition. He brushed the idea off, sure the first round would be a walkover. That guy lurking in the darkness was a rank 1 ruby, which meant that in the last tournament, he had come in between 10th and 2nd. The scene changed to a man standing in front of hundreds of thousands of ecstatic spectators. It was player Ralph, the impregnable wall, winning his second title in a row. The huge crowd basked in that great and glorious moment, calling out Ralph's name all over the stadium. Ralph was in the middle of it all, reveling in the crowd's ecstasy. The scene changed back again to Ralph in the real world, still wearing the ruby skull. He called Sophie and inquired how many fan letters he had received this month. She informed him that the figure stood at 1,244. He then calculated that it was a 15% decrease from last year, and inquired if the media and analysts had anything to say about his chances of finishing first this time. She informed him that the mean of 13 media and 43 commentators set his chance of winning at 2.736%. Enraged, he stated that he would demonstrate the unbeatable Ralph could still win. He then requested information on his opponent, Yuzu. Sophie told him that as it was Yuzu's first time, there were no figures on him. Ralph stated that his chances of winning were 99.74%, since a newcomer would never keep up with his plays. He stated that to ensure his win again, he needed to show an overwhelming disparity of power so that nobody would be able to turn a blind eye to it. The scene went back to Yuzu and Ellie. Yuzu described Ralph wasn't a player to take lightly. He had placed 10th in the previous year's competition and had already won twice previously. He then said there were only 2 methods of determining the winner and loser in the War of Corpses. One was to obliterate the other player's knight's heart, and the other was to forfeit. Forfeiting wasn't a matter of giving up. It was a matter of leaving the whole War of Corpses. Only after the forfeit match results were noted would the subsequent match not be played. Those who forfeited were similarly criticized. Ellie stated it was crazier than she expected, basically a fight to death. Yuzu stated that a knight was just a tool, but for her, having her heart shattered meant dying for good this time. Yuzu then asked Ellie what she intended to do. Thinking he was proposing they give up, Ellie responded that she had spent her entire life killing mercilessly in order to settle her debt. If she was going to emerge victorious, she had to vanquish these men sometime. Twice risking her life was of no importance. She instructed him never to give up without asking her first. He nodded, assuring her that he was happy that she felt that way, because this was also his last opportunity. He told them that they had to prepare to fight a battle that might be their last. Ralph stood outside the arena, psyching himself up before he went in, declaring his presence. Ellie was surprised at how many crowds were there, although they were only in the preliminary rounds. Yuzu told him that it was because Ralph was a champion. Ralph's corpse knight arrived, large and like a wall. Yuzu explained that it was made up of many things and living organisms, creating a living shield and barrier. Its surface had never been broken by any assault before. And in fact, whoever did so with reckless abandon would end up damaging his own weapon and not his enemy, at a disadvantage. No matter how powerful her punches were, she couldn't possibly destroy it. They had only one shot, so they needed to come up with a way to get at the main body behind the wall. Ellie said that it would be easy. If it was that big, it had to be slow. But as Yuzu started telling her why the wall was so frightfully dangerous because of its enormity, the wall crept and fell towards her, enormous, immovable, and blocking off all the routes of escape. Yuzu, acting quickly to save Ellie from crushing, reached with her left arm in haste, unleashing a hook-like protrusion. It gripped something outside the wall's reach, and she pulled Ellie in as if with an improvised Batman-style grappling hook. He said that the arm was crucial, but because of how it was made cheaply, it did not do well. Nevertheless, it acted like a biological grappling hook, able to cover around 5 meters. They saw the wall monster flip over for a moment, and they figured that was their opportunity. Working together with the hook, they charged forward into the wall in a flash, and Ellie initiated charging her right arm to deliver an attack. But Yuzu intervened, reminding her that no one had been able to break that wall yet. She withdrew her strike just in time, only to be pushed into the wall itself. The wall started to break down its structure to be able to move more easily. Yuzu said that it was the subtle coordination of each little capillary of another person's body to control a knight. Constricting the gastrocnemius, flexed the Achilles tendon, raising the heel. Not being able to control the erector spinae lost upper body equilibrium. The more massive and complex the structure, the more difficult it was to control. Maneuvering big knights was known to be dangerous. But Ralph didn't just push the wall. He broke it apart and maneuvered every piece on its own. Yuzu had never seen Ralph move as he did now. Clearly, Ralph had rehearsed beforehand. With ruthless intent, Ralph announced that he would show overwhelming strength and entered his mode, crushing zone. The shattered wall pieces started creating an enormous box intended to confine Ellie within. After being sealed in, it would be the end. Yuzu acted in a split second, employing the grappling hook to pull Ellie out of the trap. But the wall broke up once more, trying to envelop her. They had to depend on the hook in order to escape and run clear of harm. Yuzu and Ellie looked for a gap. When a slight opportunity arose, Ellie shot her grappling hook and hooked onto the wall, pulling herself up. Yet, the trap quickly reorganized itself, reforming to ensnare her once more. Ralph acted quickly in response, telling the wall to buckle in upon itself, hoping to crush her between the pieces. As this happened, Yuzu attempted to send out his own hook to rescue them, but with poor visibility, he couldn't hook on to anything. Time was running out. The wall was closing in quickly. Just in time, Yuzu was able to grab hold of his hook and yank Ellie clear, pulling her away as the wall came down. The rescue was successful, but the grappling hook shattered with the tension. Yuzu gazed at the wall, recognizing how impossible and invincible it felt. But at that moment, he realized something. Perhaps there was a way to break through it. He informed Ellie that no one had ever managed to, but no one had attempted it under this one condition before. Was the wall actually invincible? He recalled a long time back when a knight who was a master of brute force had cracked it once in desperation. Everybody who attempted it thereafter failed even to scratch it, and direct attacks were thought to be a waste of time. But what if they could unleash the strongest attack in the world, even stronger than that knight's? Then perhaps perhaps maybe, it would be possible. Yuzu then faced Ellie and asked if her punch was able to break through that wall if it was the strongest in the world. Enthused, Ellie set herself up for her finishing blow, stating that it was worth dying for. Yuzu instructed her where the core mass was, roughly 45 degrees from his location, and indicated he'd use her left arm as a signal. Then he instructed her to strike it with one blow. Ellie concentrated, pouring all of her strength into her right arm. On the other side of the wall, Ralph was amazed and yelled that they were crazy to hit his wall head-on. He engaged his compression chamber method, shooting wall chunks at Ellie, but she bolted forward with all her might and gave her finishing blow directly into the center of the wall. Her punch cut through cleanly, shattering it. Ralph stood still, his mind unable to comprehend what had occurred. His supposedly invincible wall had finally been penetrated. The audience was silent for an instant, shocked at the impossibility of what they had just seen, then cheered across the arena. Jubilation replaced shock as they cheered the incredible game that they had seen. Yuzu stood there speechless, mouth agape, soaking up the clapping and allowing the crowd's roar to envelop him. After the game, Yuzu approached Ellie and asked her if she had heard people clapping. She answered with pride, thinking that she had shown the world that her fists were strongest. Yuzu concurred, agreeing that they had done what nobody else had ever achieved. The two were in the arena as the door behind Yuzu opened. Ral walked out, serene and stable. He warned that individuals would be more concerned with Yuzu's errors rather than his accomplishments. To him, individuals were always more attracted to failure than success. Yuzu responded with unshakable conviction, his resilience and optimistic attitude recalling Ral of when he was young. With a brief goodbye, Ral warned he would not leniently treat Yuzu the next time. Then, later on, Yuzu and Ellie divided their prize money for reaching beyond the first preliminary round. For Yuzu, it was the first time he had ever received money in acknowledgement of his title as a necromancer. Since they had both cleared twice, they had technically passed the first stage. The prize money for this round was part of their contract, so Ellie proposed spending it. When Yuzu inquired about her itinerary during the break, Ellie gestured toward her left arm, which implied that she would not be moving anywhere in her current form. In reply, Yuzu instructed her to wait. With some time passing, he realigned her arm and leg to look as much like her original form as possible. While not ideal, they were well made. He also provided her with casual attire, explaining that when she dressed in them, she would be able to blend in as an average individual. He wanted her to dress up so that they could go out and experience the city. Given that they had earned the money together, it was only logical that they should spend it together. Ellie, bemused by his excitement, was taken aback at how charming he could sometimes be. Yuzu lingered outside her room. When the door opened and Ellie emerged, he was utterly surprised. She seemed natural and lovely, leaving him to blush in the spot. Ellie advanced on Yuzu, annoyed at the manner in which he was blushing, wondering why on earth he was so annoyingly flustered. Yuzu, his face as impassive as a desert skull, stared her straight in the eyes and stated firmly that, from an objective point of view, she was beautiful. To him, it was quite normal to be attracted to her, given the casual outfit, which transformed her in a big way from her typical dark look. Ellie shifted back in shock at his bold statement, her tone skeptical. She asked him what he was attempting to do. Was this some sort of confession? Had he forgotten the strange, convoluted dynamics of their relationship? But Yuzu's expression never changed, a picture of complete calm. He justified that he hadn't meant it romantically. He was just announcing a biological truth. Ellie arched an eyebrow, more irritated at his clinical tone than the remark itself. Suspicion underlined her question as to whether he had any friends. Oblivious, Yuzu replied that everybody called him trash, and his only friends were cockroaches and maggots. Ellie was left speechless, her eyes wide with stunned amazement. At a later time, the two sat across from one another at a busy diner. As Ellie wriggled uncomfortably in her seat, Yuzu's eyes darted about the room, captivated by the trappings such as a rapt tourist. He was too engrossed for a person who was not the one being treated. Ellie mentioned this, wondering why he seemed like he was the one being served. Yuzu, continuing to admire the interior design, described that it was his first time at the diner. He normally could not afford a place like this. He went on to mention that the skulls adorning the walls were allegedly crafted from waste ingredients. Ellie, gazing at the bone jewelry in revulsion, figured they were probably human skulls. She figured that was utterly mad, even for Necromancer City. While they conversed, their meal was brought, a steaming bowl of tongue of the dead. It resembled thick, fetid slop, with dubious, wriggling pieces beneath the surface. Ellie gaped at it. The food was writhing. Yuzu was undeterred, though. He promised her that it wasn't alive, simply looked that way. The meal was prepared with a special plant known as ghost potato, which grew only on dead and then revived land. Its regenerative starch was combined with powdered eggshell basilisk, spice, and magical ingredients. The outcome was pasta that moved with every spoonful. Ellie said that Yuzu knew too much about the meal. Yuzu said it was one of the city's mythical dishes. He'd always been curious about trying it, so he'd researched it first. Offhand, he informed her that since she still had a sense of taste, she should consume it when it was still squirming, because that was when it was at its best. Ellie gazed into the bowl, embarrassed. She picked up a piece with her fork, hesitated, then took a deep breath and ate it. Her jaw crept hesitantly, feeling the texture. Then her eyes grew wide with incredulity. It was quite good, actually. Ellie confessed she had never tasted anything remotely similar. The consistency emitted a gentle tingling with each bite, the creamy richness and deep umami garlic making it strangely delightful. Yuzu wasn't far behind. He gobbled spoon after spoon, eating as if he'd gone without food for days. Smiling between mouthfuls, he shoveled more in, lost to the taste. Hours afterward, Yuzu and Ellie walked along the city streets and found a gigantic statue of a lady with a hand gesture resembling that of the Hidden Leaf Village. Ellie didn't know her, so Yuzu told her it was last year's winner, Karen Crow, just 19 and the youngest ever. He went on to mention that every winner had a statue erected in the central square so that tourists would see it and be awed. Yuzu stared in wonder at its sheer size, amazed at what it was to stand there, hailed as the best of the city. Ellie, not so impressed, breezed past quickly. Imitating the statue's stance, she asked why it stood like that. Did the champion think it was cool? She thought it was tacky. Yuzu explained that it was not supposed to be fashionable. It was an official stance referred to as the single focus stance. The stance, with regulated limb movement and attention, turned all actions thoughtful. In demonstration, he led Ellie's left arm and instructed her to envision his fingers as the knight he commanded, attention on just two of them. Genuine mastery, he explained, was achieved through intention, mental or physical, to combat. In the days that followed, Yuzu and Ellie set out to explore the city as a pair. They attended a play at a dilapidated theater, sampled something cold and creamy that looked like ice cream, and strolled through markets and narrow alleys, absorbing the city's life and history. One night, they stood on a balcony overlooking the shining spread below. Warm air was filled with the faint sounds of life, as Yuzu discussed all the places they hadn't been yet. Ellie looked down at the lights, quietly thinking about how big the city was. 2 weeks of walking, and it still seemed like they hadn't even started. She had anticipated a necromancer-controlled dark city, but what she saw was culture, rhythm, and life. Looking to Yuzu, she confessed he wasn't what she expected either. There was a bizarre honesty in him, a naivety and innocence that was both unsafe and charming, and yet she couldn't help but find it endearing. Yuzu similarly found her mystifying. While she referred to herself as a mercenary, there was something about her that felt staged, almost polished, not quite comparable to the coarse existence she explained. For a brief moment he pondered whether there was anything to the story behind her, but before he could frame the thought, a voice close by called out Ellie's name. Yuzu spun on suddenly, tight, eyes scrunched up. A man was just out of clear sight, his face concealed, only visible as a twisted shadow in Yuzu's eye. The stranger spoke once more, incredulity in his voice. He addressed her as Ilonora, and told her that she was supposed to be dead. The stranger took a step forward, his features gentle and nearly boyish. Yuzu stopped in his tracks. The understanding hit him like a slap to the face. Ilonora was not just any mercenary. She was a legend. It was no surprise that finally someone had penetrated her disguise. He instantly placed himself between Ellie and the stranger, his voice even but firm as he denied recognizing the man the stranger referred to. He was going to call her his sister when Ellie caught on and nodded almost imperceptibly, whispering that they didn't even resemble each other. Uzu didn't miss a beat, turning and addressing her as his wife, Sabrina. The use of the title slapped Ellie. Her eyes went wide, her breath caught as she struggled to believe what he said. The stranger did not back down. He squinted, examining Ellie carefully, and insisted that she was Ilonora. Her hair may have changed, her skin tint changed, but he was positive that it was she. Then his attention turned to Uzu. If they were married, he inquired, where were their wedding rings? Uzu didn't blink. With a careless shrug, he defined that he had ordered a special ring, costly and impossible to replace. He would not wear it recklessly, not in a city like this one, but he did not leave it there. With the same analytical charm that was both annoying and persuasive, Uzu leaned forward and started to rationalize. He explained that the human face contained approximately 40 to 50 unique variables: bone structure, spacing, proportion. The chances of two individuals being similar enough to be confused with each other were at 0.01%. Multiply that by the population of the world, and statistically, hundreds could be almost an exact match. So judging someone's identity on physical appearance only, he claimed, was coincidence. Still, the stranger would not give in. His tone grew acidic, his eyes cold, and he insisted there was no possibility he could confuse anyone with Ilonora. He knew her too intimately. Uzu's tone got rougher, less suave now, more authoritative. Looking at Ellie, he called her Sabrina and asked whether she recognized the man. Ellie hardly shook her head, her expression unyielding. Looking back, Uzu said bluntly that she didn't recall him. Firm and unshakable were her words. A boot hit the stranger's face with a square blow, and he fell to the floor, blood already dripping from his nose. Ellie blinked in shock. It was Uzu's boot. He had hurled it with brutal precision. No warning, no hesitation. Ellie hadn't even had time to move before Uzu was on his way, giving her a quick glare and a silent nod. She trailed behind without speaking. They merged into the rhythm of the city, abandoning the stranger behind, cursing and bleeding, reaching for nothing. That evening, in Uzu's apartment, the atmosphere had quieted enough for questions. At last, Uzu asked who the man was. Ellie leaned against the couch and gave his name, Naren. A fellow archer and mercenary, she called him a constant thorn. Uzu surmised if Naren was a competitor. Ellie winced, massaging her forehead as if the mere thought was painful. It was the opposite, she told him. She had saved his life by mistake, and since then he'd been trailing around after her, assuming it was more than that, attempting awkwardly but incessantly to woo her. Uzu scratched at his chin in puzzlement, hand to head, lost in thought. After a pause, he said he didn't care about her type. So long as she fought well beside him, that was what mattered. Ellie sighed and explained that Naren was a man. Uzu froze, eyes widening slightly. He sat with it for a moment, then nodded slowly and dropped the subject. Ellie continued, saying the real problem was Naren's obsession. She had rebuffed him categorically, and even though he'd lost interest in her, he was the type who would go to any lengths for her. He could still be looking for them. And actually, his being here could mean that he'd come looking for her corpse, never knowing she was alive. Uzu's face darkened upon hearing this. Naren was trouble in his book. Now that he had caught a glimpse of Uzu's face, any mistake further would endanger both of them. They had to be prepared for the worst. For now, however, Naren had no concrete evidence, nothing concrete to act against them. Uzu thought it wise to leave. The second preliminaries were set to take place, and that was where their concentration had to remain. The scene shifted back to Naren. His nose was bandaged in a coarse bandage, still puffy from the hit. His gaze fell on a sketch tacked to the wall, a portrait of Ellie. As the camera backed away, his fixation was apparent. The whole wall was plastered with doodles of her. Naren stood before them, clasped hands as if in prayer, gazing at Ellie's face, sure that odd man had done something to her. He vowed to do whatever it took. Even if it meant giving his life, he would rescue her. Then the narrative shifted to the tournament administrators. The fellow who had made the opening address now headed a line of underlings down a cramped hallway, their footsteps resonating off the stone. As they moved along, the underlings gave run-of-show reports. Revenue was down 4.6% from the previous season. Ticket revenues were consistent, while city expenses decreased by 8.44%, and investments as well as ad revenue had decreased more than 4% as returns declined. When the chief inquired why, one of his underlings responded that the fans' behavior had changed. The audience now concentrated on popular brawls, lingering for a moment before departing once their featured match finished. Shouts resounded down the hallway suddenly. A man burst into security, carrying a corpse and demanding to meet the CEO. Guards chased after him, but the CEO held up a placating hand. As the man drew closer, the CEO asked calmly what had occurred. The intruder produced the corpse knight, explaining it had been refused registration as a participant. Its silence wasn't incapacity, he stated. It was intentional. To demonstrate it, the body came back to life for a few seconds, spewing out green muck. A junior officer tittered, which his CEO overheard. In recognition of the demonstration, the CEO made a proper apology, acknowledging the rejection had been unwarranted and entirely their error. He instructed the guards to take the man away so compensation and arrangements could be made. After he was gone, the CEO faced the guffawing junior officer. Challenged, the underling apologized but taunted once more that such a frail frame wouldn't survive the preliminaries in any case. Annoyed, the CEO challenged him, asking if he had the right to pass judgment on people. He reminded his team their responsibility wasn't just to establish the industry, but to shape the lives it impacted, and that anyone who spoke ill of the value of a rival didn't belong among them. Sitting back in his chair, he said human strength frequently originated through weaknesses. With that, the underling was dismissed. As the rest departed, leaving him behind, the CEO directed that the guards who had flunked on the job were to be relieved, and the Division 2 security chief to undergo disciplinary review. Lastly, he issued one final instruction. All staff were to prepare for the second preliminaries. This time, as part of efforts to enhance player visibility, the matches were to be scheduled unlike any tournament ever before. By the stadium, there were already a few who had gathered, their voices mixing into a hum. Among them, some started to applaud for Yuzu. The applause was anything but deafening, but Yuzu accepted it gladly, raising his hand in appreciation to those few who still had faith in him. But even in that brief moment of acceptance, the usual shadow crept back. The cold, dark, merciless one. It whispered its poisonous truth, that he was worthless trash. The shadow took hold of him, not his body, but his very soul, and proclaimed that he and his mother were garbage, bred from garbage, and that they would always be the same. No amount of trying could make them otherwise, it spat. Yuzu, under its weight and its venom, did not succumb. His shaking arm gestured upward in defiance as he vowed to rise, to become great, to disprove the shadow. But the shadow merely sneered, laughing at the possibility that a man like him could ever hope. And then, with crushing power, it smashed him, grinding his will beneath its heel. Yuzu opened his eyes with a gasp, his hand around his throat, breathing rough and eyes staring in horror. Bleary, he looked around the room until he caught sight of Ellie. Stumbling towards her, she began to cry, condemning him for showing his true colors at last. She had suspected it since he'd told her she was pretty. But rather than fight, Yuzu fell, weeping into her shoulder. Through sobs, he pleaded with her to make him invincible, someone no one would ever look down on again. Ellie remained silent. She just put a shaking hand on his back and silently promised to stick with him. The following morning, Ellie mentioned what had occurred. Yuzu had been in a haze, she explained. Did he recall? Would it influence the fight? But Yuzu blankly looked at her and asked her to explain what she was speaking about. When she reminded him of the way he'd clutched her, weeping hysterically, he dismissed it, saying she must have been dreaming. Collectedly, he instructed her to prepare. The second preliminaries would soon commence. Seconds later, red envelopes popped up throughout the city, each one with the new rules of play for the next round. When competitors opened them, alarm was passed. When Yuzu read his face grew harder. The rules were not good. Competitions would now be competed in groups of 3. Best 3 out. Ellie knew right away the problem. They already had trouble communicating, and now cooperation would be necessary. But Yuzu revealed the actual twist. Each group could have only one gold-ranked or higher player. Ellie got it right away. It meant less overpowered groups, more balanced matches, and more limelight for up-and-comers. But she still scrunched up her face. How were they supposed to get teammates when everybody was rushing to join with big names? In front of the magnificent mansion of Ral, a throng of necromancers assembled with a hope to collaborate with the legendary master. Yuzu observed it from across the street on the rooftop, describing the facts to Ellie. It was necessary to establish teams by direct negotiation within 3 days and seal the membership with signatures of all the members. With a confident grin, Yuzu told her to wait. He had someone in mind. Below, Ral strode through the crowd as fans called out to him. Ellie's eyes widened. "You're planning to recruit Ral?" "Of course," Yuzu replied. "With his unmatched shield and our strategy, we'd be unstoppable." He waved at Ral from the rooftop. Ral looked up, paused for a moment, then looked away as if he hadn't spotted him. The next day, Yuzu attempted again. Another wave, another cold shoulder. On the third day, Ral didn't even attempt to hide his disgust, cursing that he'd never stoop so low as to ally with Yuzu. Finally, Yuzu realized Ral had been intentionally avoiding him. His brash veneer started to crack. Ellie stared at him, concerned. "What now?" "We only have 5 hours remaining until the team submission deadline. You need a plan B, right?" Yuzu didn't say anything initially. Then, in a hollow tone, he conceded the fact. He'd never had proper friends. The realization struck Ellie like ice. Her face went pale as she stared at him in silence. There were only 3.5 hours left before teaming up closed, and the main square was filled with nervous activity. There were perhaps 800 necromancers there, almost all struggling to complete their teams. The clock was ticking close, and desperation gripped the crowds. They all had a few things in common. They were black bronze level, had average abilities or reputations, and struggled to work well together. Faults that were previously insignificant now became hindrances. A grand old man yelled above the din, proclaiming his 30 years of necromancy experience. Rather than admiration, this declaration was rewarded with scorn. A younger necromancer sneered, stating that being bronze for 3 decades was something to be ashamed of, and his age only made people nervous. And then, rising above the commotion, Yuzu stood up and yelled in the center of the square. Brazenly, he announced that he was the person who broke through Ral's wall, something no other had been able to do. He referred to it as a feat impossible to accomplish, stating that if that did not awe anyone, then nothing would. The crowd went quiet, eyes scanning him. Ellie, in the background holding back amidst the corpse knights, buried her face in her hands in embarrassed silence at his boisterous performance. As Yuzu's assertion subsided, hushed voices spread. Some undid his declaration, stating that Ral was already over the hill, and his wall was bound to fall anyway. One such boisterous necromancer mocked that if Yuzu was referring to today's Ral, then even he could have shattered that wall. In spite of the doubts, at some point someone came to Yuzu with an offer to partner. Yuzu asked the man immediately what type of knight he commanded. The necromancer gestured over his corpse knight and boasted that it would be able to crush 5 meters of solid rock when hurled at maximum speed. Yuzu did not care. He informed the man immediately that they were not a match and offered that he might want to try elsewhere before leaving. Others came over, but Yuzu vetted every necromancer and knight with careful attention, rejecting them one by one. The more powerful players he attempted to approach rejected him flat out. Yuzu was too fresh on the scene. Nobody knew him. In a game where reputation was everything, that was a death sentence. Maybe if he had done the crowd better, attempted to bond, or sold himself, things would have turned out differently. But Yuzu, who had never experienced proper camaraderie or teamwork before, found it more and more impossible to join a team. One of the tournament officials then blew through a megaphone that there was only an hour left. Anyone who was not registered into a team at this point would be out. Breathing softly beside Ellie, Yuzu whispered to himself. Ellie, obviously upset, informed him that he had squandered too much time and hadn't managed to get even a single. Teammate time was running out, and she proposed that they quit and begin making preparations for the next match. Yuzu would not hear of it, however. Disqualification was not just humiliating. It carried a ban of 10 years before being allowed to re-enter. The full impact of that fact struck Ellie forcefully. 10 years essentially ended a player's career. She balled her fists, recalling their promise of never surrendering until the last. The cruel rules compelled every contestant to his limits. Frustrated, she demanded that he partner with anyone, but Yuzu shook his head. For him and her, losing was not defeat. It was death. He wouldn't risk her life through a hasty decision. With new resolve, he promised to enlist the best remaining necromancers, as few as they were. As he was about to make a move, 2 necromancers approached him and offered to be a team. Yuzu instinctively asked for their knights. One presented a Kikan-based knight, an underwater creature with the ability to release unique ink that blindingly blanketed large areas. The other spoke of a knight with the ability to interfere with signals and shoot blood projectiles from a distance. Yuzu evaluated them. Both had solid specialized skills, one a disruption specialist, the other good at range combat. Between them, they had the missing pieces he and Ellie didn't: defense and reach. At silver and bronze rank, this was probably the best duo Yuzu was likely to get. He questioned the two on why they picked him among all the other applicants. They responded with a simple answer. His raw offense, the capability to break through Raoul's wall, had impressed them. They had not had that level of strong decision-making and felt that with his addition, they could gain an upper hand. A necromancer offered a hand, and Yuzu shook it, formalizing their alliance. They sat down hastily to discuss coordination. As they chatted, an officer's voice resonated through, saying that there were 20 minutes left before registration ended. As they spoke, Yuzu shared a vital piece of information. His most powerful attack would only be usable once in a match and had a 4-hour cooldown. With the restriction in place, he promised them its value, stating it could kill even a knight behind Raoul's wall, a guaranteed kill. A single necromancer lingered at the limitation, knowing that a reliance on one blow was unsafe. But Yuzu calmed him, saying that his knight had several all-around abilities that were superior in most fight situations. The disadvantages were obvious, but the allure of such unmitigated strength was irresistible. They continued to talk about battlefield coordination and how to deal with command conflicts when in stressful situations. Just as they were finishing, another officer's message blared across the square. 8 minutes left. Yuzu, aware of the dwindling time, urged them to finalize and submit the registration immediately. At that moment, the red-haired necromancer suddenly stood, saying he needed to use the restroom and would be right back. The officer's voice boomed again. 4 minutes left. Yuzu grew restless, wondering why the necromancer hadn't returned. There was no time to hunt down another partner, but the other. Necromancer did not appear to be fazed by the passing clock, seemingly unbothered by the present situation. Then it hit them. While Yuzu fumed, a familiar taunting voice chimed in from behind. Kalina walked up to him with a self-satisfied smile, teasing him for expecting anyone to team up with a loser. When he spun around to her, it became evident. The 2 necromancers had never planned on being a team with him. They were her cohorts, dispatched to delay and disrupt him. Kalina scoffed, telling him that lying was simply another aspect of the game, and that not seeing it simply illustrated his ineptitude. She labeled it, in feigned politeness, a negotiation breakdown. Her one ally spoke of the promised payment, and Kalina gave a nod of approval. She told Yuzu that all teams were now set and congratulated him on his unavoidable disqualification. And with that, she turned and went away with her conspirators content. The last declaration of the officer resounded. The last minute. Yuzu was rooted to the spot, his eyes contorted with fury as the weight of betrayal and powerlessness sank in. Uzu ran, panic in his tone as he yelled out across the square, summoning anyone who was still untamed. His voice boomed through the madness, urgency rising with each split second. From the corner of the square, someone jumped up, saying that he was also unteamed. With no time to waste, Uzu shoved the registration form into his hands. 40 seconds to go. The two commenced shouting once more, pleading for one final teammate. 20 seconds remaining. 10. As the officer began the last countdown, 3, 2, Uzu ran to the registration booth and pushed the completed form in front of him. The officer grabbed it just in time, nodding in recognition and remarking at how close it had been. Uzu's team was officially established. The team members were announced. Uzu himself, the elderly man from before, Borak, and the last to be added, a player named Aira. The new 3-member team started strategizing prior to the resumption of the tournament. Uzu approached Aira and inquired about her fighting method, but she was unresponsive and unmoving, her eyes quivering slightly without comment. Perplexed, Uzu wondered if she even heard him. In the meantime, Borak was throwing a tantrum, packing his belongings with anger. It was announced that out of the 8,304 necromancers who had entered the first preliminaries, 5,005 had qualified. There were also 2 forfeits, and this figure did not include the former winners who had been exempted from the first round. In total, 1,660 teams had been formed for the next rounds. As Uzu learned, he couldn't help but wonder about his team. Among all those players, theirs had been the last to coalesce, the leftovers, so to speak. In his mind, they were the worst team on paper, hands down. But he attempted to salvage face, telling himself, well, except for me, of course. I'm not the problem here. No, of course not. This was all Kalina's fault, her Olympic-level sabotage to blame. Because what better excuse than a genius schemer's interference when your team looked like it was assembled from a bargain bin? Borak puffed out his chest, declaring that their team was blessed, lucky even, to have him, the great Borak. Seated opposite him, Uzu recalled that he'd been stuck in bronze for 3 decades and hadn't advanced to a single finals match. But Borak, indifferent, waved it away with a smile, saying experience was the only thing that counted. He'd passed the second prelims more often than any freshman alive, and this season he was confident he'd make the finals. To him, the team had just acquired a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. When Uzu inquired about what type of knight he possessed, Borak sneered and disclosed his so-called trump card, a corpse knight in the form of a colossal cockroach. He referred to it as the Cockroach Knight, the product of 30 years of struggle. Uzu and Ellie gazed at it in silence, their faces a combination of horror and incredulity. Borak, completely unflappable, went on to give a talk about how cockroaches were the greatest survivors, a species which could survive for days without their heads, feed on anything from glue to soap, and survive even the most violent stamping. Yes, they were disgusting. Yes, the world hated them. But they lived. And wasn't that, in some sick way, admirable? Listening, Uzu saw that Borak was literally outlining the life of himself, 30 years in bronze, holding on to hope. The cockroach, it appeared, was his spirit animal. As he examined the knight, Uzu conceded it wasn't awful. Its basics and balance were good, if it didn't have any outstanding qualities, just obstinately functional. Going to Aira, Uzu inquired about her knight. She did not speak but called it out instead, a huge black cat. Both Uzu and Borak blinked in surprise. Aira scribbled something in a small notebook in silence and held it up. It's a cat. Simply a cat. Later at Uzu's, Ellie complained in frustration. How is it just, she insisted, for you to put her life at risk with a walking plague and a silent girl with a wild cat? Didn't he vow to pick teammates carefully for her own good? Uzu, resting his face against his hand, let out a defeated sigh. He confessed things hadn't really gone according to plan. It just so happened. Nonetheless, what was done was done. Accusing anyone now was futile. Looking up, he spread out before her their bleak reality in stark words. 3 choices: win and rise, die and disappear, or lose and be forgotten. nothing else. He pressed Ellie for the last time what she had planned to do. Ellie went quiet, her thoughts speeding. Following a pause, her eyes hardened in resolve. There was no going back. They'd traveled too far. Resolute, she said, "No matter what, we see it through to the end." Uzu nodded resolutely. The world transformed, becoming a huge arena filled with energy. The audience cheered, and the announcer's thundering voice dominated the air, explaining the regulations. 3-man teams would clash in a best-of-3 series, with winning granted only when all three of the opponent had fallen. No tie, no do-overs. The introductions started. Team 1, Uzu, Borak, Ira. Their names elicited nothing more than stiff applause and interested whispers. Then the second team, each member draped in immaculate white robes that obscured their faces. The announcer's voice cut with recognition. Claude, Sarin, Bertar. The crowd exploded at the mention of Claude's name. Just as if cueing, one of the robed figures came forward and imperiously shed his robe with dramatic flair. Underneath was Claude himself, posing so melodramatically it was impossible to know if he'd gotten the battlefield confused with a stage. His corpse knight mimicked his actions with supernatural accuracy. A long-bladed humanoid, elegant but horrible, like a gallant executioner. Ellie stared at the corpse knight in front of her, tall, blade-legged, and tastefully macabre. She narrowed her eyes, confused. "Was that a ballerina?" she whispered to Yuzu, unsure what manner of depraved combat technique she was watching. It was lethal, yet beautiful, the kind of art that could pirouette someone into death. Yuzu concurred. Its capability was undisputed. The two rapidly checked their comms, which functioned flawlessly. Yuzu, masked now and brooding, whispered through the channel to make sure Burak and Ira wouldn't listen in. Softly, he reminded Ellie of their previous strategy meeting. He would first send in the agile cockroach knight to reconnoiter the enemy's rhythm and tempo, taking damage if necessary, but living to gather data. Once they'd gained enough information, Ellie would kill a major target to alter the balance. That would result in a neat 3 versus 2 situation. Yuzu then, with a hint of annoyance, asked out loud what the crazy cat knight would even be doing while they carried out their plan. Ellie, skeptical to begin with, said wryly the big cat couldn't fight at all, provided it even cared to. Yuzu didn't actually know. He hesitated, remembering a past conversation with Era. He had questioned her explicitly about her knight's potential. Anybody who'd passed the first prelims must at least have some strategic value. But Era, being herself, did not say anything. She did write something in her notebook and flipped it over. "My kitty is so cute," it said. Yuzu and Burak were aghast. Hearing this secondhand, Ellie seethed. Reality struck her. This battle was really down to her and the cockroach knight. Yuzu, sternly, told her to prepare for the worst, even a 1 versus 3 possibly. With that in mind, he swore they were going to keep it with prolonged battle instead of mobility. Ellie's left arm, custom rebuilt with a blade built into it, was evidence of that strategy. Yuzu poked it, reminding her why he'd switched her hand in the first place. She inspected the sword, conceding it was the proper decision. Her fighting skill would have broken down after taking one good hit otherwise. With no reluctance left between them, both of them stood mutely but firm, prepared to complete what they had started. The announcer's loud voice boomed throughout the stadium, signaling the beginning of the first bout of the second preliminaries. With a dramatic flourish, he waved his arm to the fighters to start. Burak, frantic, bellowed that he would now show them the power tempered through 3 ruthless decades. His cockroach knight charged forward, quicker than anyone could have believed, gliding low and smooth along the floor with supernatural ease. Claude, though draped in his customary theatrics, approached his teammates Saran and Berder with a flourish, saying that every performance was lacking without music and light. On signal, the two dropped their hoods. Saran, blue hair and intent, offered to take care of ambience, demanding the opening act be slow and measured. His knight, a monstrous mixture of bones and stringed instruments, started plucking at its own ribs, loosing sad, haunting harmonics that sounded across the arena. Berder, cool and deliberate, instructed his own knight. Increase the light. Power all 17 segments of the vertebrae. Hold the beam stable on center. His device, a spider-like framework of bones topped with a single blazing eye, complied. It stretched up in the form of a shattered lighthouse, sending a blinding beam across the field. As the light and sound merged, Claude breathed in rapture, proclaiming that they would now fight through rhythm. His ballerina knight started to dance, scimitar-shaped legs shining as it turned and glided with unutterable beauty, a killing dance of horror and elegance. While Burak had intended to begin cautiously, pride overcame him. Observing the other team's stage crew, their light operator and musician, apparently laid bare, he could not help but stand idle. The ballerina's perfect twirls appeared to leave it open, and the cockroach knight, always in favor of haste over wisdom, charged forward. In a moment, it was cut in two neat halves. The ballerina had swung out a blade leg during twirl, cutting it in half with ease, never missing a beat. The attention of the crowd fell upon the main stage. Ellie recognized the ballerina as the main danger immediately. She charged forward, sword extended, meeting it head-on. Its blade-like limbs snapped out in lightning kicks. But this time, Ellie didn't back down. Her sword intercepted the first strike, screaming metal against metal. The knight changed stance, firing a series of spinning attacks. Ellie threaded the tempest, her moves swift and calculated, her reflexes cutting through disorder. When the knight charged at her center, she fended, but the brute force sent her back. She slammed hard, rolled, and leaped back up in a bewildering motion, attention honed. The ballerina's speed and power dwarfs hers. Its reach overwhelmed the arena, controlling the flow of battle. Yet her focus did not falter. All she needed was a clean break. Their struggle went on, steel clashing in rhythmic savagery. But during the exchange, the ballerina's sword bit through Ellie's, cutting it in two. Momentum drove it onward, a killing blow about to fall. When suddenly the splintered cockroach knight re-emerged, dragging Ellie back in a flash. Yuzu looked at Burak in shock. Pride-swelled Burak elaborated. On the brink of death, his cockroach knight's body reddened, pumping octopamine in its system, going into berserk mode. There, in that frenzy, it traveled 10 times its normal speed, fueled not by self-preservation, but raw, violent energy. Ellie rode upon its shattered frame as its cowed rage shook with restrained violence, seconds from detonating another rampage. Yuzu listened to Burak's logic in silence. 10 times the speed of normal would see the knight traveling so fast it would hardly be perceptible to the human eye. The reasoning was outlandish, but at such a speed, the knight would in fact become unapproachable. Burak was confident as he stated that at such speed, any physical attack could never hit. He explained his strategy. His knight would charge, create an opening, and Yuzu's would follow through. In doubt, Yuzu assented, willing to bet on the madman's zeal. In dramatic bravado, Burak announced the culmination of his lifelong work. His groundbreaking device, a technique that would astonish the world, his voice raw from excitement as he bellowed its name, Annihilation Dash. The instant it powered on, the cockroach knight exploded into twisted metal and sparks. Debris rained onto the field. Ellie gazed in shock. Yuzu blinked. Neither of them said anything, then both of them turned to Burak, their disappointment an aching drizzle. Under Yuzu's critical stare, Burak's grin broke and cracked. He exhaled and slumped, as if the bitter reality of failure had finally come to settle over him. With a tired shrug, he admitted defeat. The method had never succeeded before, never at all. Still, he had really thought so this time. Instead, it annihilated itself alone. Claude was unimpressed and looked down his nose at the explosion, calling it a pitiful excuse for a performance. He told them their job. As villains, their job was to make the protagonist better, and this debacle had not done so. He called for more of the second act. On cue, the ballerina knight changed. Extra limbs, which looked like arms, unfurled from its torso. Claude called for a faster pace. The knight struck rapidly, twirling and jumping like a whirling drill. Ellie attempted to flee, but the whirling storm pursued her relentlessly, only inches away. Hassien observed in the background the transition from adagio to accelerando, and cautioned Claude of an identifiable note within that tempo. one with cataclysmic potential. As the tempo quickened, the instrumental knight altered its melody, swapped arms, and launched a projectile. The beam struck Ellie directly, throwing her against a pillar. Bruised and stunned, she continued to stand, determined to fight. The Eye Knight then burned her with a hot red sigil. Berter watched quietly that as the pace quickened, so did the temperature. The assault, known as Melting Ray, lasted but a moment. 3 seconds exposure could melt flesh to cinders. Yuzu imbued Ellie's right leg with energy, compelling her to jump out of the way just in time, untouched. Another note sounded. Another projectile. Ellie jumped out of the way, but the ballerina would not give up, slicing mid-air with its blade-like legs. Just in time, Ellie deflected the blow with the broken pieces of her sword. Yuzu assessed glumly. She'd pass out before delivering a killing blow at this pace. A radical change was necessary. He came up with an equation, a diagonal punch, 45 degrees to the floor. Ellie followed orders. Strength surged through her right arm, and she punched into the ground at the established angle. The effect was instantaneous. The earth exploded in fury. Stone and dust ripped outwards as a shockwave uncoiled through the arena. The land cracked open under her strike, compelling all fighters to stumble. For a beat, quiet dominated the aftermath. The enemy knights stood frozen, awed by the raw force of the blow. It wasn't just destruction, it was Ellie's moment of mastery. Yuzu saw the greatness of the technique, not in raw power, but in accuracy. The force drilled inward, distorting the battlefield itself. Getting a direct hit was still hard, but the twisted landscape provided holes. The irregular terrain sabotaged enemies that depended on range and equilibrium. The ballerina knight staggered through the wreckage, its originally elegant movements breaking down. Ellie attacked from hiding, though the knight's reflexes remained keen. They fought again, though now the landscape betrayed the dancer. Every move stumbled against the broken floor. Ellie dodged around rubble like a ghost, closing the gap. As she approached, the ballerina retaliated, cutting off her left hand. Fearless, Ellie advanced. Her single arm pounded into her opponent. The ballerina stumbled halfway through her movement. Claude called out for backup, but the debris obstructed their line of sight. The weapon knights had nothing to shoot, and the Eye Knight saw nothing. Ellie was stuck in tight quarters. Her opponent was immobilized. Her last attack smashed the knight's central gem, ending the battle. Claude stood in shock, stunned by the destruction. Barak gazed in wonder, amazed at Yuzu's spontaneity. The ballerina knight was silent, paralyzed, its form disintegrated to a weak, charred shell. The story transports us to a flashback. What is a knight to a necromancer? Some would say it is nothing but a pile of reanimated flesh, a macabre amalgamation of corpses welded into an instrument of war. But some would dissent. To Claude, his knight was remarkable. He handled it with respect, appreciating the elegance and precision of its legwork. To him, Feniliv was not a monster or a puppet. It was art. It was identity. Enticed by it, Claude yearned again to take his rightful place as the star of the stage. Feniliv was not just a work of creation. It was a replica of Claude's soul, a precious shard of himself. Now, in the present, Claude bellowed in terror as Feniliv was destroyed before him. It was as if his world had ended. He fell to the ground and fainted on stage. Medics hurried over to him. Upon examination, they declared it temporary shock, not life-threatening. The game would proceed. With Claude stabilized, the visiting team was given a chance to regroup quickly. The visiting team had lost a crucial element of their offense too. The balance might still shift. Berter lifted his head, harmonizing with his knight's vision to survey the battle. He saw Ellie coming at him, defenseless and unstoppable. He shot his fusion light ray at her, but Ellie did not meet the attack head-on. She grabbed the corpse of the knocked-out knight, using it as a shield to deflect the beam and bridge the gap. Then, ripping a bladed limb from Feniliv's body, she sprang out of the ray's path. Hurling the blade in midair straight into the corpse knight's eye, she went clear through it. Refusing to wait, she ripped another blade off and attacked the instrument knight. it fired back at once with a signature projectile. Sitting in the stands, watching it all, Cien observed coldly that working the strings did not start the play. It finished it. The corpse knight pulled back its own strings to construct a massive bow and shot an arrow with enormous force. Ellie had just enough time to respond. The projectile hit her, knocking her into the debris, but it did not penetrate. Yuzu had stepped in harmonious synchrony, protecting Ellie's center with her left arm, taking the force of the impact on herself. She was attentive and calm, undeterred. She rushed forward, dodging the second wave with ease, and closed the distance, cutting off one of the knight's huge fingers with Finale's sword-like limb. Saren thought quickly and asked Berder if he had any energy remaining. When Berder assured him he could muster one last shot, Saren signaled his intention. His own knight would hold Ellie back while Berder landed a final decisive blow. By Saren's command, the dropped knight jumped on Ellie, holding her against the ground. Berder's knight charged its fusion ray and fired it at Ellie and the instrument knight. The energy was pushed above safe levels. The beam became unstable and blew up. Berder conceded that he had overextended himself. Siren, in control as before, praised his attempt. They waited with bated breath, not knowing if the battle was won. Then the broken pieces of the instrument knight disintegrated. Ellie stepped out, bruised but unshattered. She charged and slew Berder's knight in a single, perfect swing. The final of the enemy knights dropped. Standing over the rubble, covered in blood, Ellie was triumphant. Silence swept over the arena. Then the crowd burst into applause. Cheers boomed like a tempest. Yuzu stood there in shocked amazement, watching the curtains of applause. It seemed like a dream. The thunder of the crowd swept over him like sacred water, washing away years of shame and contempt. For that instant, he stood and bellowed his name to the world. His voice boomed out over the stadium as the crowd started to chant it as one. Recalling the years of rejection, humiliation, and erasure, Yuzu screamed out his name once more. When the game finally ended, the mood changed. Yuzu now had Era pinned against the wall, yelling angrily, his anger pouring forth as he accused her of remaining silent as they risked their lives. As they bled, she had laughed. His fist tightened on her collar, driving her harder into the wall, desperate for any excuse, any justification that could render her silence pardonable before his final moment of control evaporated. Ira doodled something on her notebook and held it up for Yuzu to read. The note stated that the cat didn't listen to her because its master was only itself. Yuzu knit her brow, puzzled, and asked if Ira was the one who made the cat. Yet even then, Ira would not refer to herself as its master, stating the creature only did what it wanted to do. Frustration covered Yuzu's expression as he parroted her words, hoping to comprehend why she would say that she had nothing to do with it. He insisted that no one would be stupid enough to think it, and if she was telling the truth, then why on earth had she participated in the War of Corpses to begin with? Era wrote again, stating only that the cat had wanted to go along. Veins bulged on Yuzu's forehead as his fury grew. He said it was useless to talk to her, but he couldn't help himself. His voice chilled with determination. He was fighting for his life, and if she killed his knight, then both she and the cat would perish. With this, he stormed off. Elsewhere, Borek stood in front of a bathroom mirror, examining his face. Fatigue seeped into his marrow, and the lines on his face appeared deeper than they had been in his memory. For an instant, he wanted to quit, but the vision of Yuzu forging ahead without rule or surrender made him change his mind. Perhaps that was what youth's abandon resembled. Shortly thereafter, Borak chose to spend what little he had to commission a new knight. He deliberated. If he ate once a day, he could manage. During his way home, he picked up some skewers from a street vendor. His eyes danced until he yielded and purchased some, taking them home though he had no money in his pockets. Back home, he shared them with Dora. She wanted to know why he continued to waste money when they had so little, but Borak admitted he couldn't stop because she liked them. He reassured her, explaining that his work on the annihilation rush technique was nearing completion. Dora's expression lightened as he told her he had finally collected sufficient energy, although his structure collapsed beneath internal stress. He thought about how cockroaches endured pressure by squeezing their bodies and transferring shock through their joints. His next night would replicate it, relieving stress through concealed vents. Initially, he intended to insert the vents in the joints, but soon changed his mind. It would be more effective to incorporate them into the seams of the exoskeleton. The thought thrilled him. This time he was confident it would work. Dora smiled, commenting that although his eyes frequently seemed lackluster, they seemed to shimmer when he talked about the war of corpses. She couldn't help but respect that. Borak flushed and attempted to deflect it, though inside he felt this time was different. If he pulled it off, then maybe he would be noticed at last. The realization embarrassed him, and Dora reassured him in her soft way that no matter what, she would never abandon him. Later, in his workshop, Borak confronted his half-finished knight. For once he was sure. But in the quiet, it came. Doubt. When had it gotten so difficult to even fantasize about accomplishment? In his fantasies, the one who was being cheered on stage was never himself, but always somebody else. He asked himself if this time was really different, or if he was just kidding himself once more. But to give up now would be to toss away 30 long years. He did not accept that. He promised that this time, absolutely, he would win. Back at Yuzu's residence, meanwhile, Ellie is grumbling about burns on her scalp. Yuzu says he will cut her hair, explaining he cuts his own all the time. Although reluctant and without a salon, she consented to have him just cut off the ends. He reminded her to trust him, as she did in combat. When Yuzu had cut her hair, Ellie was amazed at what he had accomplished. He informed her that he had repaired it and gave her a mirror. As soon as Ellie saw herself in the mirror, her eyes grew wide with astonishment. Once Yuzu was done cutting the hair of Ellie, she was angry. What had been straight and sleek before now resembled hair that had been chewed by a rat, uneven and jagged. Yuzu continued to say it looked the same, but Ellie pointed out that her hair used to be cut evenly before, and she had only requested a trim, not for her hair to be hacked. Deciding that he would correct his error, Yuzu grabbed scissors once more, cutting it all in one. The sides were uneven, and trying to fix them made the situation worse. By making multiple attempts, Ellie's hair was shorter than she had desired. Seeing how terribly it went, her anger raged. Storming away, she instructed him to be silent, trusting him no more. As for Yuzu, he discreetly picked up the dropped strands from the ground. The following morning, Ellie woke up to see Yuzu sitting next to her, reassembling her cut-off hair. Furious, she questioned him as to what he was doing, but he explained to her quite calmly that he had discovered a way to repair it. Working with the same natural glue used by necromancers when they were making knights, he was meticulously attaching each strand back one at a time. It wasn't complete yet, still too small, but if he glued on maybe 1,000 more strands, it would look complete again. Stunned, Ellie wondered if he had really spent the whole night gluing them one by one. He waved off her worry, telling her to have faith. Though shocked, she heard him go on, telling her they were playing games with their lives, and he had promised her something, one he was going to keep at all costs. Her face, he promised, would not suffer. Grudgingly, Ellie let him have his way, and this time his work proceeded without a hitch. In another place, in a crowded eatery, customers chatted eagerly about the previous 3-on-1 bout. The warriors had been exceptional, particularly for their first time around. Even Rawl's defenses were breached. They were so powerful, one punch might have cracked ribs. The majority of the gossip was about a human warrior with gleaming silver-pink hair. Everyone thought that this strange look was a demonstration of the necromancer's personal preference. The rumor died down as Neron arrived and inquired about the name of the necromancer involved. One of the patrons remembered it was us. Neron thanked them and departed, lost in thought. A silver-pink-haired woman knight who fought so well. It crossed his mind that maybe it was Ilonora, but that made no sense. Knights, as he knew, did not have memories or will of their own. Why, then, had this one fought as if she still did? The idea disturbed him. They had used the pseudonym Rawl when they fought back then. None of this was adding up yet, but Neron promised to track down the necromancer Us. Distracted, he collided with a pole. Only 9 days until the next fight. Yuzu indicated 2 principal problems they had to resolve. First, their methods didn't have any names. Ellie scoffed at the suggestion, waving it off as useless, remembering fighters who bellowed attack names like Spinning Axe. Yuzu countered that naming styles provided them with identity, something people could remember, possibly even claim a nickname like the Iron Wall of Rawl. He even suggested a name for their go-to attack, something strong-sounding, though Ellie was unmoved. Unfazed, Yuzu went on to the second concern. On watching tapes of their punches, he acknowledged that even he couldn't defend against them in close proximity. If they got a direct hit, they would win, but knights were superhuman, quicker and keener in all respects. Getting such a hit would not be easy. Ellie concurred. Yuzu further pointed out that they had depended too frequently on ground advantages, which would now no longer exist. What they really needed was an approach to close the gap in one sudden motion, a genuine technique. Ellie considered it. If only they could close that gap in a snap, they would win. She questioned whether by technique he was referring to something akin to the alteration of her left arm. Yuzu assured her, but explained that actual techniques were much more complicated. Her arm adjustment, he explained, was really a beginner's drill, hardly deserving the title. An actual technique involved rebuilding biological systems from scratch, using scarce materials, or gathering information from champion fighters. Such a procedure took months or more. Ellie was amazed at the duration. Yuzu said something about the Claw of Yuna, a much-coveted skill for its huge potential. Others had attempted to duplicate it, but only 2 succeeded, and that was after 5 years of mastering it. Ellie also discovered necromancy was more complex than she had thought. Yuzu chimed in and said that when a design was finished, it was simple to reproduce, which was why necromancers rarely changed a knight's body after its creation. Nevertheless, with limited resources, they had to take a risk on unstable, high-payout materials with low success rates. Eventually, Yuzu gave birth to a box and told the reason why they purchased it. Within the box was a substance that unnerved Ellie. She stepped back, stating it seemed spooky. Yuzu told her it was the leg of an organism named the Difgust, an insect that dwelled in deep holes on the Black Mountain. Within the core of the mountain was a slippery pit that went down, with methane and hydrogen sulfide filling it. Juveniles resided at the bottom, where they ate slimy moss covering bacterial colonies. But when they matured, the pressure within their bodies increased until their organs needed oxygen. In order to survive and reproduce, they had no option but to break out of the pit. In their juvenile state, they put all their nutrients into their legs and gambled everything on a single, desperate jump up out of holes that ran kilometers long. Ellie became curious, understanding that these were the legs which enabled them to move out of their place of origin and mature. Yuzu attested to this. The Difgust was able to jump hundreds of meters in a single bound, their muscle fibers extremely dense but notoriously hard to manage. Due to that, they were seldom used directly, rather to amplify or support a knight's body. They were difficult to work with and unpopular, but their constant availability made them comparatively inexpensive. Ellie wondered if something like them could be constructed and installed within a few days. Yuzu acknowledged that it would be impossible for a mere human to accomplish, but reminded her that he was no ordinary man. When she asked him why he hadn't used this fabric in the first place, he replied that he hadn't had money and had been busy building her. The risk hadn't seemed necessary at the time, as they couldn't even walk side by side. But now, this could very well be what won them war, or lost them it. He implored her to have faith in him, swearing that his decade of experience would finally be worth it. For 5 days, Yuzu worked non-stop, drops of perspiration running down his forehead as he toiled over Ellie's leg. It wasn't going well. Grousing to himself, he started thinking he was jinxed. When Ellie questioned him, skeptical that he could do it, Yuzu confessed the muscle fiber patterns were a lot different from what he'd anticipated. He hadn't learned yet how to deal with the compression fibers, but he made himself breathe, to think he could. He had to. As he examined her arm, Ellie said she'd found herself recently thinking her motions had become automatic. She was able to move without conscious thought, as if her arms really belonged to her. Yuzu verified it, taking notes. He informed her that he observed her each day, how she laughed, the way she walked, the slightest mannerisms of her actions. When she was irritated, her left eyelid would twitch. When she was deep in thought, she knocked 3 times on the floor with her left heel. When she was exhausted, she raised her right shoulder, and when she was about to sleep, she always rolled onto her side, often even picking her nose. Angered, Ellie shouted at him, accusing him of being crazy, but Yuzu looked at her in a solemn way, informing her that he had been observing her microcurrents, analyzing each minute motion so that she could move naturally without thinking. Without this observation, he continued, he could never have served as her perfect arm and leg. Ellie was shocked. She wanted to know if he had done all this just for the sake of winning the war of corpses. He admitted that was true, but said that if she required his services, he would be with her until the very end. He would be her limbs, since they were now partners. His words left her agog, and she spoke in a low murmur of denial. 4 days after that, Yuzu met with his colleagues. Borak immediately noticed something different about Ellie's form, and, looking closer, realized one of her legs had been made from a difgust. He was astonished. Crude though it was, it seemed functional. He asked if Yuzu had tried it yet. Yuzu said he had only completed it half an hour earlier and tested it once, but the results were a success. Borak examined Ellie, then looked over at Yuzu with an air of excitement, stating that the young necromancer was seriously gifted. Borak became enraged and shouted that he was not going to lose, and that he would exhibit the true power of a veteran soldier. Yuzu could expect it. Yuzu merely instructed him to do his best. With the second match of the second preliminary round underway, Ellie was poised. Yuzu reminded her that if they won, they would move on. Ellie conceded she was anxious, commenting that when they had taken the previous test, the adjustment had not seemed stable. Yuzu concurred that he had not had the time to get it right, but encouraged her to hold out for only a few rounds. She asked whom their next opponents were, and whether it would be the girl called Kaylina. Yuzu concurred, but did not expect to win. The announcer then announced the teams. Team 1, the team of Yuzu. Team 2, Sabino, Rudin, and Belodir. Yuzu observed that each of them had a black rank. He and Borak wondered these might be untrained necromancers who got eliminated in the initial round, or risky new joiners for the first time. Ellie checked their knights and found them strange-looking. She questioned aloud whether such beings even qualified as knights. Yuzu figured they did. Their shape was uneven, their attack and defense unguessable, but their build seemed solid and of high quality. Yuzu offered Borak the lead. Borak gratefully took it, intent on proving himself. On the signal, he dashed forward, crying, "Annihilation dash!" His cockroach knight blazed red, radiating energy. On the far side of the arena, the other necromancer smiled. Borak bellowed that things would be different this time. Power seethed within him, certain that he would at last release the real annihilation rush. But before his cockroach knight could stir, a projectile ripped through it. The enemy's spherical knight had evolved into a cannon, spewing lethal ammunition. The necromancer chortled, claiming he had already killed the highest-ranked one. The second adversary was Ellie. She psyched herself up as Yuzu told her to unleash the strength of her new leg power, jumping and dodging her next foe's projectile. Following her dodge, she asked for another try, and Yuzu instructed her to have her fist ready as well. Concentrating her power into the arm, it started glowing red as the enemy's knight completed charging up its next shot. Ellie jumped directly towards it then. Yuzu likened the action to looking at a dim single dot in boundless darkness, an individual light being the only beacon to the future. Each step toward the future represented the pressure of immeasurable doubts and hidden troubles bearing down on him. Still, he kept going, advancing again and again into the unknown. He did not want to give up. For him, this was the personification of his raging will to achieve his objective, a method which he called one strike. Ellie struck well, crushing the opponent's knight into pieces. Yuzu cautioned her to be on guard, remembering that 2 more enemies were still left. Then Yuzu started glitching. Ellie, frightened, asked him what was going on, telling him to hurry because the enemy was getting closer. She instructed him to kill, and Yuzu complied, mirroring her instructions that killing the enemy would be victorious. His face contorted more, and yellow glowing dots flashed in his eyes. Borak screamed at him to wake up. The target Yuzu was firing at was not an enemy. It was one of his own allies. Ellie was now perched atop Era's corpse knight. Her sword arm, still in the control of Yuzu, came crashing down in an effort to stab him. Borak motioned with his hand in front of Yuzu, attempting to dispel the illusion, but it did no good. Interference in this way between players was not allowed in the game. No sooner had the fight started than the enemy team's round knight had opened up and released something odd. That was when Yuzu lost his mind and started attacking his comrades. It was a form of mind erosion knight, but unlike usual ones with activation requirements, this one took its entry straight into the mind. Their necromancer foe was far too skilled. Ellie found it difficult to hold back her arm, still controlled by Yuzu. Even though she frequently said she hated the cat, harming him was out of the question. She pleaded with him to release his grip, but the sheer force with which her arm was controlled shocked her, and it was nearly impossible to restrain. She weighed up breaking her own arm, but remembered that if she did so, they would be left severely disadvantaged. She stalled, not knowing what to do. Borak worked out what was happening at once. Even great mind erosion knights couldn't keep intricate mental control. Convincing Yuzu that all of his friends were enemies and making him attack them was probably as far as its power extended. Borak decided killing the caster would break the control, but he was already struggling just to get away from the other two enemies. He considered employing Annihilation Rush, but if that did not work, their cause would be lost. He cautioned Era that withdrawal might be their only choice. Era went right on creating hand signs. When Ellie's arm pushed forward at that moment, aimed at the enemy, Yuzu, still possessed, proclaimed victory as the cat knight's head was cut cleanly from its body. The severed head of the cat knight bounced and rolled away. Although completely severed from its body, the cat started changing into a shadowy goo, reshaping itself. Once its head had hardened once more, the cat made eye contact with Ellie. She assured herself it was not on purpose, but the cat immediately engulfed her, engulfing her completely within its shadowy form. Within, she felt an ominous presence. But as suddenly, the cat kicked her out into the open air. Drenched in sweat and shaking, she was amazed at what had happened. The cat dived instantly forward, attacking the knight that had murdered mind corpses. At this, the necromancer ordered a defense, for the mind-controlling knight was paralyzed while he kept his hold. One of their foes darted to cover the mind-destroying knight, while another moved forward to confront the cockroach knight. When the opponent attempted to hit the cat, it jumped out of the way, dodging with impossible quickness. The necromancer controlling the mind-eroding knight started doubting his friend's value, then shifted his focus back to Yuzu, unleashing another flood of mind erosion. Borak stood there as Yuzu came back to himself, and reminded him he had just been assaulting his own friend, describing that their enemy knight was a master of mind erosion. Having known this, Yuzu realized that all that he had just seen was a virtual illusion. None of it was actually real. As he had anticipated, their opponents were powerful, but he vowed he would not come under control again. He shouted to Ellie, ordering her to get ready. Exhilarated, Ellie felt a rush of reassurance at the sound of his voice amidst the disorder. The necromancer changed targets, redirecting the mind erosion spell towards Era. The Crow Knight, at the exact same moment, as the Cat Knight attacked the mind-eroding knight, intercepted, sending the cat flying. The masked necromancer claimed control of the cat, but another asked about the condition of the cockroach knight. The response was, the cockroach had exploded and died suddenly. Borak was heartbroken. He didn't know why it had failed him once again. He believed things were going well, but his persistent attempts only resulted in frustration. He was overcome with grief while Yuzu said nothing. The Crow Knight grabbed the cat, held it aloft, then brutally ripped it open, its beak sinking into the body and pulling it apart piece by piece. The mind erosion method was meanwhile explained as causing frenzy, to make the victim see everything around them as enemies, and to attack indiscriminately. This was most effective when enemies were bunched but was lost once the fighting became disorganized. as now it did. The necromancer opted for a different strategy. His knight started to evolve, destroying itself until the pieces reformed into a humanoid creature with butterfly wings. Ellie and Yuzu merged their speed, attacking the new creature simultaneously. With a combined effort, they delivered one massive blow. The reanimated knight was unprepared, but raised a triangular shield almost at once. Despite that, it couldn't hold out against their sheer strength. The shield broke, and the knight was destroyed before it had a chance to respond. The necromancer stood there stunned, then began to exit the arena. The masked necromancer called out to him to go back, saying the fight was not yet over and that they could win. He begged for instruction. But Rudin asked if their knights appeared to be deceivers from a normal necromancer. Calling the round lost, he instructed to prepare for the next. He acknowledged that it was a blessing to face such foes. It would mean they would triumph the next time. The masked necromancer seethed at Rudin's demeanor, calling him arrogant and reminding him that he was the first among them to have fallen. He promised to make Rudin prove him wrong and prove himself. The Crow Knight cleaved the Cat Knight in half at that moment. The cat had been cut in half but did not perish. Half its body remaining, it attacked the Crow Knight, rolling directly onto its head. The masked necromancer could not understand what the cat was trying to do in this condition, but it locked tightly, crushing the crow's head into the earth. The crow fought hard, but the cat wrapped itself around its head and, inch by slow inch, started eating it whole. Yuzu stood by in amazement as the cat swallowed the crow whole with nothing left over. After it was done, the cat started changing again. This time, fresh limbs grew, legs and wings looking remarkably like those of the crow that it had eaten. Even Ira's friends were shocked at the sight. The rest of the necromancers did not believe what they were seeing, deeming it as impossible. The cat then had the Crow Knight's legs and wings, a definite sign of copying. Terror gripped them as they wondered if the cat could copy other knights by just eating them. Such an occurrence went against every existing biology law. Yuzu was also shocked. Its unorthodox movements and out-of-pattern fighting pattern were unfamiliar to him. More disturbingly, the cat could apparently regenerate its broken form based on its diet, reforming itself in the middle of battle. Yuzu couldn't even determine what kind of material comprised its body. Questions started forming in his mind. Who was Ira, then? The masked man, unsettled, turned to his partner. Though outnumbered 2-1, he asserted that he had cracked all their opponents' moves and queried whether his friend could change the course of events. He admitted no one else could do it, half conceding that his friend was the most powerful amongst them. Sabino accepted the compliment, acknowledging he had been found out. He asserted true power could never be kept under cover. Even though he had intended to save his final move for the finals, now he had no other choice. Standing his knight on its feet, he threatened that soon they would be shaking in their boots before the actual monster he had unleashed. The knight stood up tall and released its final attack. In a split second, however, it was slashed in half and dropped lifeless onto the ground. Eli had killed the monster in one swift blow. The opposing team was devastated with disappointment when the fans went wild, cheering Yuzu's name and calling him the best. Yuzu reveled in the applause, as if all his cares had been washed away by the tide of adoration. He had won again, stronger and more in unison with each victory. Still, their opponents had been formidable, especially Rudin, who had wielded mind erosion without hesitation and even attempted to shift tactics through molting. His ingenuity and skill were undeniable. To claim the championship, they would have to defeat him once more, and preparation was key. Yuzu noticed Eli's silence and asked if something was wrong. With a moment of hesitation, she asked about necromancy, namely, how a dead body moved as if it were alive. She wished to know what kind of technical or magical element allowed it. Yuzu said that while numerous studies described its practices and rules, the underlying principle of necromancy was still unknown. She likened it to seeing the sun rise and set, and yet not knowing the machine behind it. He assented, but questioned why she was so inquisitive. Eli reminded him of the unusual action of the cat that morning. He conceded that it had been unusual, particularly because it was a kind of knight he had not encountered before. To realize that it could reproduce another knight by simply eating it, becoming greater in the process, was incredible. After a moment, she pushed him further, directing the question towards herself. Knights were meant to be mindless automatons, but she still remembered and spoke. She couldn't imagine how that was possible, or if anyone else might be able to have the same quirk. Yuzu hesitated for a moment before confessing he had never seen another such case as hers. He wondered what prompted her to mention it now. Eli described how, when the cat swallowed her, she could feel some foreign substance probing her body, compressing her cells as if to disassemble them individually. While it was doing that, she could hear a distant voice somewhere within the cat's body, whispering constantly, questioning whether it should eat her or not. Yuzu brushed the idea aside, telling her that it was not possible. To him, she would have had to be under mind control. No knight could be so aware. But she intimated that maybe, as with herself, it was another exception. Just at that moment, someone knocked on the door. Yuzu scowled. No one should have been calling at the time. He shouted out for who was there, but there was silence. The knocking persisted. Getting near the door cautiously, he advised everyone that breaking into players' waiting rooms was not allowed. When he opened it, to his surprise, Era stood there waiting. She stood in silence, as Yuzu froze in shock. Yuzu told Era the match had concluded and wanted to know why she had come to his room at that time. Ellie readjusted her mask. Yuzu figured that Era had thought the match was too perilous and had planned for her cat to eat them. He looked for the cat, feeling something behind the door, hoping it would be there. But Burak suddenly opened the door, pushing both Era and Yuzu in. Burak then spoke to them, extolling Yuzu as the insane, emerging god of necromancy, and acknowledging Era as the insane cat who ate other knights. He expressed gratitude to them for letting him proceed to the second preliminary round and indicated that this time he could finally qualify for the main tournament. In a tone full of excitement, he declared that this year was different from years gone by and that he really believed that they had a shot. Yuzu questioned why Burak had trailed behind him, and Burak responded incredulously that comrades, albeit briefly united, ought to at least mark occasions together. When Yuzu questioned whether Ira felt the same way, Burak confessed he didn't know, adding that she would not reply but appeared quietly hungry. Ira remained quiet and unflappable as usual. The cat called outside the door as Yuzu stood watchful. Everyone gazed at Yuzu in shock initially. Later, Yuzu, who had on a party hat, informed them that they were ultimately going to have to battle one another. Anyway, so it really didn't make a difference. Burak agreed, but opined that fighting together first had been great fun. Yuzu heard Burak go on to remark that it had been a while since he'd done anything with other people, and maybe that was why he'd had such a great time. While serving in the War of Corpses, he had never felt enjoyment before. But being with young prodigies like them, he felt alive once more. Nearly young. For some reason, he was convinced he could really make it this time. Ecstatic, Burak had announced that this year would be the one, his year to be champion and be acknowledged by all. Yuzu disagreed, protesting that the championship belonged to him. Burak responded by offering the soon-to-be champion a celebratory drink. Yuzu had taken the drink but continued to claim it wasn't any fun. Soon he was thoroughly drunk, clothes in disarray, wildly dancing. He and Burak danced like madmen as Ira played a pirated version of Jenga and lost, though the party went on. Interestingly, Ira was the only one that could drink on, still drunk-free after 18 glasses, whereas Yuzu was completely drunk after only one, an incredible achievement. After some teasing back and forth, Yuzu sprawled on the floor as Burak and Ira sat close by. Burak questioned aloud whether or not Yuzu had truly grown up rummaging through trash in a junkyard. Stumbling and incoherent, Yuzu admitted to having spent his whole life devouring leftover scraps, being ignored and referred to as rubbish. Suddenly, with renewed vigor, he asserted that regardless of how and where one is born, only the individual themselves has the authority to determine who they are. Burak believed that he had heard that before and inquired as to who said so. Yuzu answered that it seemed like Raphael. The camera lingered suspiciously on Era, as if she were the daughter of Raphael. Yuzu clarified that Raphael was the best necromancer and that he wanted to be just like him. Under that line of thinking, Era's similar hair color was another evidence. After all, In anime and manga, exact matching of hair color is a de facto DNA test. Ira wrote in her journal, "If you want to be like Raphael." Yuzu explained that Raphael was the beloved of all necromancers. She then inquired whether he knew what became of Raphael. Yuzu seemed confused. Barak remembered that it was a long time since news of Raphael had been heard, and wondered if he must have become wealthy and was enjoying life to the full. Yuzu bellowed that Raphael was a remarkable man. Eira wrote vehemently before stopping abruptly. Ellie, who was behind her, realized that Eira's face had puffed up with swollen veins, her face contorted in rage. Ellie was shocked. In the meantime, a man ran on a treadmill for 15 minutes and 13 seconds before falling over, then stood up and ran again, falling over again. They nicknamed him the CEO, and his overall run time was 9 hours, 15 minutes, and 16 seconds. 3 seconds more than he did the week before. He was happy, claiming to have become a better person than last week, but others were concerned that if he continued to push his boundaries, he could die. The CEO swore that he would rather die than not get better. This CEO was the individual who had taken the failing war of corpses and made it the best entertainment globally. Efficient and calm but mysterious, nobody knew his age, place of origin, or even his name. He was a specter under a wide-brimmed hat, a ghostly figure of the war of corpses who lived but could not be felt. What he intended to gain by this tournament was still unknown. He inquired whether the information was correct, and his subordinates assured him that it was a summarized list of the tournament's outstanding players. He loved it, believing that this would be the most exciting tournament ever. As the last preparations were being made for the preliminaries, he inspected and sanctioned the final actions, pronouncing that they would fight with a will to die, and if so, that the world would never forget their victory. 2,502 contestants who passed to the third and last preliminary round, excluding prior winners, made up the group. Every preliminary round, as stated, had its own different rules, so preparation became tougher and tougher. The best approach was mobility and endurance. But Yuzu knew they already had a dire situation. Ellie charged toward them with amazing speed but slipped and fell to the ground. Her leg broke once again. The last one had lasted for 7 runs, but this one had ruptured after 4, a result to be expected. Creating legs for a Nefes wasn't an easy feat, but their trial runs had provided Yuzu with a clear idea of what was required for improvement. They tinkered with it again, and the new design lasted 6 times, and even made it to the 7th, breaking a new record. But on the 8th attempt, it came apart. Ellie was careening towards a rock, preparing for impact, when Yuzu blocked her path, taking the hit for her. Examining her, he determined that Ellie was uninjured, while his own shoulder had been fractured. He said it was merely a dislocation he could repair on his own, something which had occurred multiple times prior. Ellie objected that a dislocation was not to be taken lightly, but Yuzu, being out of his mind, informed her she meant more to him than anyone else at the time, and if she wasn't hurt, nothing else did. Ellie heard this and turned bright red. Yuzu went on to say that her body was a little warm and asked her if she was okay. She instructed him to shut up and not fuss over her. Yuzu then continued to explain that after a Nefes risked its life to flee from the pit that it was born in, it would shed at once its inefficient, energy-wasting rear legs. Ellie understood that the legs were designed to be used once in a lifetime and then abandoned. Yuzu concurred, saying that this accounted for their brief natural lifespan. Their tests indicated that the legs could safely handle 3 uses, but after that, a function of their performance or not, they would ultimately collapse unexpectedly. Ellie realized the risk but refused to give up on the legs being too effective. Yuzu concurred, explaining that they had to complete the match in 3 jumps. Ellie then inquired about the regulations for the final preliminary round the following day. Yuzu said he had no clue. They were utterly unheard of. The only limitation was that knights would have to be scaled down to 5 meters or smaller. Ellie noted that previously there had not been any size restrictions, which indicated they might be battling within a small arena. At the beginning of the final preliminary round, A huge red gate stood in front of thousands of awaiting participants. Yuzu was curious if the game would be a battle of teams and what lay behind the gate. He guessed that the mystery of the round was behind it. A sign told contestants to leave their knights and proceed with the guide out slowly. Yuzu instructed Ellie to wait while he went off. Being alone among such a crowd in the palace was claustrophobic. He had been with Ellie ever since until now, but now mocking voices rang in his mind, cursing him as pathetic, disgusting, and worthless. Darkness seemed to close on him as he started breaking down. He attempted to call Ellie, but she was out of range. The insults became deafening, and he could hardly breathe. Then a hand clamped on his shoulder. It was Burak. Burak assisted Yuzu to overcome the mental attack and told him that the time had arrived to witness the magnificent moment prior to the main tournament. After Yuzu had composed himself, Burak inquired about his preparation for the final preliminary round. Yuzu assumed that the organizers were organizing some sort of team fight. Having finished the mandatory proposal forms and agreeing to the rules, the candidates were then issued magical devices to strap onto their arms. The device on the left arm showed distance and current ranking, while the right arm device was for protection. The CEO said that the right arm device was a one-time teleportation device, only usable in cases of emergencies or forfeit. Once the match was done, it would teleport them automatically to a predefined safety zone outside. These gadgets were crucial since the battlefield was very limited and hazardous. The CEO then nodded toward the gigantic red gate, indicating what was behind. 9,999-meter-long living beast, the very personification of hell. When the gate slowly opened, it revealed a monstrous southern maw, its throat exposed like the intestines of the underworld. The only goal of the last preliminary round was to make it to the end of the intestines of hell. It was a set of rules, previously unseen. The first 1,000 to reach the finish line at the end of the gut-wrenching intestines would move on, and killing another contestant with a knight or leaving the arena would disqualify. Such was considered to be lack of will to proceed. Inside the intestines, many eye-like magical monitoring devices had been placed to watch and relay the progress of the contestants to the outside world. The race was about to start in a minute, and the announcer cautioned all of them of the gruesome experience that lay ahead in the living hell. No one ever saw a preliminary round like this. Yuzu was disturbed by the CEO's threat that only the first 1,000 would emerge, which meant that anyone who failed would be stuck inside the gut that was collapsing. Ellie also said that the intestines would burst at some point and kill the knights, emphasizing that not ending up among the top 1,000 meant death for sure. In spite of the risk, Ellie was drawn to the concept of a race for life or death. Burak invited Yuzu to ride with him on his cockroach steed, telling him that even without the use of his annihilation rush, it would beat any knight on foot. Since Yuzu's assistants had already pushed Burak to the second preliminary round, he was prepared to reciprocate this time. Yuzu cautioned Burak not to renege on his promise. The participants held their breaths for the beginning, and finally, the announcer signaled that the final preliminary round was underway. The crowd filled the entrance point and plunged into pushing and grabbing in order to find themselves inside the intestines. Burak's cockroach sprinted ahead, leaving Ellie's running pace far behind. Burak admitted that he hadn't excelled in combat, but in moments like this, he could show the true capability of a veteran warrior. However, several knights began overtaking him, pushing the competition further. Yuzu jokingly called Burak the Effort King, asking when he'd ever live up to that name, but Burak stayed silent. Then they arrived at the gate. Their current standing was 873. The entrance was crowded with individuals, yet being in that spot was not so bad. They ran as fast as possible, with the knowledge that all they had to do was get a spot within the top 1,000. The intestines' walls started to contract like living tissue on a colossal scale. Tongue-like projections burst apart, creating steep cliffs, and Yuzu and Burak slid down them, racing through a near-vertical tunnel. A mouth-shaped magical communicator declared that they were in the esophagus of hell and alerted them to special obstacles to come that were meant to slow down contestants. Any contestant captured by them would be immobilized for 10 minutes. One whip-like tentacle whiplashed at Yuzu, but Ellie quickly severed it, rescuing him. Yuzu made up her mind to stay near her. To be alone was as bad as being defeated. They slid together, Ellie deflecting and dismantling the hazards in their way with skill. When one came too suddenly for her to defend against, she pushed Yuzu out of the way to make room, and they slid on. Their fingers touched for an instant, and Ellie, holding Yuzu tentatively flat, sidestepped the next danger completely. Having slid almost 800 meters, they landed on firm ground, now placed at 911. Burak and his cockroach were still lagging behind, held back by the crowded corridor. When they reached firm ground, they pushed on toward the end. Yuzu inquired whether the cockroach flew, but Burak told him that until he mastered his annihilation rush, flying wasn't achievable. Then, out of nowhere, Yuzu overheard someone yell his name. It was Wung, the frog bomb necromancer, and Yuzu's very first fan. Wung welcomed Yuzu with enthusiasm, telling him that he had been rooting for him the entire time. In order to express his support, Wung had turned his knight into a huge, highly detailed replica of Yuzu's face. Yuzu and Burak were both amazed and frightened by seeing the huge face standing in front of them on the field. They continued to run as far from Wung as they could, but the frog bomb necromancer relentlessly chased after them, insisting that Yuzu come to a halt and properly appreciate the huge face he had created. Finally, Yuzu and Burak were able to get past him. Burak commented that the invention was a hellish monster, but Yuzu became angry, telling him it was rude to say his face was gruesome. Pausing for a moment, Yuzu admitted the face was ugly, himself not enjoying the view. Burak, alarmed, wanted to know why Yuzu felt so self-hating. Wung then came back, his giant knight, Yuzu 2.0, striking battle again. Wung loudly announced the arrival of a pretty face, as Yuzu 2.0 dramatically stuck out its tongue, but the large head made it lose its balance, and it fell onto the front wall. The walls in themselves were peculiar, filled with holes in different shapes and sizes. With little time to make up their minds and their rank falling rapidly, Yuzu, Burak, and Ellie made for the most normal-looking hole to make an exit. Their position had dropped to 977 at that point. Elsewhere, beyond the intestines, the action was being televised using magical eye machines, with commentators enthusiastically describing the action. A nearby officer informed the CEO that audience interaction was good, with new players receiving publicity and interaction with the crowd hitting targets. He did, however, express fear that the race was too much reliant on fortune, making it subject to media attack. The CEO inquired if the officer thought he had earned his place simply by working hard. The officer indicated that perhaps he was not the best, but he had always done his best, which had led him to that chair. The CEO nodded in agreement, explaining his own success was partly luck. The officer recognized that the CEO had lived responsibly, but the CEO continued. He had been lucky to avoid sickness, to be born during an era that was favorable for his skills, to encounter individuals who appreciated his strengths, and to have loving parents. His success, he concluded, was a result of circumstance. Nevertheless, he wanted to test if desperation could triumph over destiny, if a man, blessed with luck, could resist calamity. He thought the tournament would be a platform to showcase human strength, and that people would feast on the spectacle. Within the intestines, the channel was constricting. Yuzu worried that it would shut down, and they had to fall back, but Burak would not yield, declaring that retreating now would be a defeat. To go back that far. A necromancer knight stood in their way suddenly. The necromancer instructed them to head back and find another path, but Yuzu would not listen, claiming that because they had already been 700 meters, going back would double their loss and increase the risk of being disqualified. The necromancer complained, citing cost, and stating that this was their last chance, but Yuzu stood firm that his life was more important. The necromancer had reminded him of the rules of competition, that players should not intentionally cause damage to other people's knights, although combat from knight to knight was allowed. She struck, her knight's tentacle almost brushing Burak's cockroach. She threatened that if they lost their knight, disqualification would exit them from the arena, and she encouraged them to get going quickly. A burst of light indicated Ellie's action. She had run forward and cut the necromancer's knight in half. The necromancer was then teleported out of the arena. Yuzu consulted with Burak. Although some of their legs were cut off, they were still able to move throughout their bodies. They pushed on, now realizing that night fights were permitted, introducing a fresh degree of uncertainty to the race. At last, they saw the finish. 7,800 meters to go. Yuzu prayed that the following section would hold some secret advantage, but as he looked around, something odd caught his attention. Yuzu gasped. Before them wasn't an open space, but a throbbing tube lined with veins that glowed softly red, as if blood ran through it still. The farther in they saw, the more the walls seemed to be breathing. It wasn't their imagination. The intestines themselves were alive, contracting and relaxing in rhythmic motion. He saw that this part was not a passage, but a part of the heart system of the creature. One misstep here, and they would be crushed immediately. Ellie moved low, studying the floor as it shook beneath them. "It's responding to movement," she told them. "If we charge in, it'll snap shut on us." Borak scowled. "Then how do we go?" "We can't remain here forever either. Look, our rank's falling." Their left arm tools registered 997. 3 more behind, and they would be gone. Yuzu breathed deeply. "We go when it exhales. When it constricts, halt. Time it to the second." The walls contracted once, a slow rhythmic spasm, and he ran forward, jumping with precise timing. Ellie was after, her rebuilt legs kicking the fleshy surface to accelerate. Borak spurred his cockroach knight ahead, its claws digging into the slippery ground. For an instant, it all worked. They progressed almost 300 meters when a deep, resonating thump echoed through the air behind them. The walls started heaving irregularly, no longer rhythmic. The heart had gone arrhythmic. Ellie almost fell as the ground tilted, sliding her towards a meaty abyss. Yuzu caught her hand, himself digging into the floor with his knight's claw. "Hold on, don't let it suck you in." Cockroach Knight scurried over and offered a leg. Yuzu grabbed hold of it just in time, yanking Ellie back onto firm earth. Borak yelled, "The organism's going wild!" reversing blood flow. A red, thick liquid started pouring in from the other end of the tunnel. It was not blood alone, it was acid. The luminous veins exploded, spewing forth bubbling fluid that hissed when it came into contact with metal. "Run!" Yuzu commanded. They rushed ahead, their ranks now shimmering 1001, 1999. The acid boiled up behind them, reducing whole knights to slag too far in the rear. The cries of the doomed resounded through the tunnel, hacked off individually as teleportation bursts swept aside the unsuccessful. Ellie's legs sparked with furious energy. "They won't last," she yelled. "Just 3 more times," Yuzu cautioned her. She balled her fists and ran further, her pace blurring with speed. Each pace left a faint red stain as her body overheated. They were just short of the end when a dark figure cut off the path. A towering knight stood before them, insectoid in form, with segmented metal armor and radiant green eyes. The necromancer riding it donned a worn cloak, his face hidden behind a steel mask. "Turn back," he cautioned. "After this point, the way crumbles." Yuzu hesitated. "Then why are you here?" "To ensure others don't go through," the masked necromancer said matter-of-factly. "Orders from on high." Ellie scowled. "You're giving up your life for that?" She sprang, heading straight for the insect knight's chest. The masked necromancer spread his hands, creating a shielding cocoon. Their charges clashed. Light and darkness briefly writhed together in midair. The explosion that followed ripped the barrier asunder, sending pieces of carapace flying through the tunnel. Yuzu mounted its back, surveying the devastated skyline. The cube throbbed once more. Heartbeat detected. Target closing in. Yuzu slitted his eyes. "No rest for the weary, eh?" A blast of wind screamed through the ruins of the city. In the distance, he caught a faint red gleam, the same rubicund light reflected from Tyron's armor. He tightened his knight's reins. "Then let's see which of us will get to live, Tyron." The wind bore his voice away on a whisper across the desolate landscape. "And which will be done with." That's it for today. Come back for more crazy recaps next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.